I'd like to call this meeting of the Oregon Education Investment Board to order. Just one housekeeping thing. First, the microphones are few and far between. We ask you to share. We're talking about kindergarten, right? So sharing is something important because you do need to be in front of a microphone in order to be heard. I'd like to welcome the Early Learning Council. This is a joint meeting. And so, Pam, I don't know if you have a word that you'd like to say before I turn it over to Hannah for the business of the day.
Sure. I think my job was to set some context for the conversation that we're about to have. And folks, both in the Early Learning Council and the OEIB should have materials in front of you. But the reason that we're here is that I think we all know that the early years of life, from birth until roughly a child enters third grade, are some of the most developmentally rich in terms of figuring out both emotionally, psychosocially, from a brain standpoint, development standpoint, how that child is going to learn, how he or she is going to interact with his or her environment and problem solve going forward. We know that having access to high quality experiences and early learning opportunities in that period of time, as well as having secure, attached relationships with adults in their life, are really important for setting that early learning trajectory in a positive fashion. And we know that those early gains can disappear after a few years if we don't pay intentional attention to them. And so the legislature, in their wisdom in the last legislative session, established a kindergarten partnership and innovation fund and put it under the auspices of the Early Learning Council. Largely, the purpose of that fund was to establish innovative and creative opportunities for early learning providers and professionals to form a closer relationship with the early grade professionals in schools, kindergarten through third grade in particular. And so in thinking about trying to establish the criteria for distribution of these funds, the Early Learning Council thought this really ought to be an opportunity for us to do something meaningful together as the Early Learning Council and the Oregon Education Investment Board. We're working hard at developing the early learning system. You're working hard at some additional reforms, and this is a really meaningful place for the pieces to meet in the middle. So you might recall that we established a joint subcommittee to work on the establishment and recommendation of the criteria. That subcommittee's been meeting. It was from the Early Learning Council, myself, and Marlene Esquin, who's not able to be here because of her own early learning experiment, who was born on November 4th. So she wasn't able to be here today. And then from the OEIB side, it's Mike Mulvihill and Hannah Andrew, and Hannah is going to present the criteria that we've developed for your consideration.
Thanks, Pam, and I'll ask Hannah to lead us through the discussion.
Great. So you have your handout, the Kindergarten Partnership and Innovation Grant. And if you don't have it in the audience, they're in the back, so you can get one of those. And just, Seth, is the PowerPoint on? Okay. All right. Just want to start by saying how great it is to work together. As most of you know, I'm an elementary PE teacher, and it is that transition from early childhood to kindergarten is a really important transition. And I will tell you, walking down the hallways the first day of school, sometimes that transition is harder for parents than it is for students. I think we've sent home many a parent crying and fearful for leaving their students off at our schools. And I think that one of the things that we're going to talk about today is that transition and how we help everyone in that transition. So it was great to work with the Early Learning Council, and glad that you're here today. So again, it's talking about the first transition. We're P through 20. We're looking at the system as a whole. And as we look at this first transition point, Seth, as Pam just shared, we had our subcommittee that started to meet, and House Bill 2013 put in place the work that we're doing. And it's great that we were invited to join in the OEIB with the Early Learning Council to look at this and come up with the criteria to best move forward. You're really going to have a hard time seeing that print. I can see that right now. And the criteria, or the purpose of the fund, is to promote community and school partnerships and innovations that result in measurable increases in readiness for kindergarten. So if that's the purpose, the joint committee was asked to consider the following. And as we were doing our work, the types of entities that are eligible for funds and what partnerships should exist for eligibility, the characteristics of a successful application were considered, indicators of applicant and or community readiness that must be demonstrated by the applicant, and how the state will evaluate effectiveness of funded innovations, and finally the continuality of funds. As we looked at these, we had some recommendations that come right up at the beginning about the eligibility of applicants. And we believe that, we're bringing forward to you the recommendation, that any school district, K-12, should be eligible. ESDs, nonprofits, post-secondary institutions, early learning hubs, and or a collaboration of those should be able to apply for one of the grants. The second area of recommendation is the use of funds. We're recommending that the funds not be used for capital expenses or to supplant existing federal or state funds. So those are two recommendations. And the final, right up front, is the size of grants. We are recommending that there are no restrictions on the size or the number of grants, but that we look to approve the grants that most impact students across Oregon. As we looked at the criteria that were laid out, the legislature identified the following that could be used by the Early Learning Council. And so you have those in front of you. I'm not going to read them all to you, but as we reviewed the recommendations, we made minor tweaks to some of the criteria that should be used, and then we're making some additional recommendations. So the additional recommendations that we are bringing to you, and there's one mistake in the handout that you have, so I'll point that out as we get to it. But the recommendations, we are looking for a plan that is likely to result in a demonstrable connection between early learning providers and schools. We've talked about that connection, and you'll see that in Appendix A if you've had a chance to look at that. That connection is extremely important. Secondly, a plan that is significantly likely to improve kindergarten readiness as measured by the Kindergarten Readiness Assessment. As we've rolled out the Kindergarten Readiness Assessment, we'll be getting some data back about that. It is, how do we make that transition easier by having students prepared to move in? So that would be a criteria that we would put forward to you. The one that should be eliminated off of your document that you have is the applicant should have a proven track record. We've eliminated that recommendation. So if you would please note that. We have 3 additional recommendations. We have an equity lens. We believe it's extremely important, so we have asked that applicants demonstrate a clear commitment to equity as they're bringing forward their proposals. Also, a plan that reaches metrics not included in the hub RFA. So we're looking to target the most difficult populations or communities by increasing the grading, bringing together some of the funding that you have from state and federal funds that you can use, but to bring those together to get have the biggest impact on students. And then finally, the applicants demonstrate a commitment to contributing to statewide learning around best practice. And you'll see in the appendix, again, if you look at that there are some best practices that are highlighted that could really make a difference for our students that have been proven in other states. So those are the criteria that we're bringing forward. There are also some priorities. As we looked at what the legislature shared as far as priorities, we've left the 2 priorities that they have. Those were to assist children in becoming ready for kindergarten or being successful in kindergarten, and those that share professional development strategies and resources with providers of early learning services, care providers and kindergarten teachers. As we had our conversation, we have 2 additional priorities that we'd like to bring forward for your consideration. Those are a commitment to family engagement and 3-way partnership. Early childhood, school, and parents working together is a priority that we think should be in the applications that are approved. And then finally, the priority that the investment will serve a significant number of children and communities with high concentrations of poverty, underserved racial or ethnic groups, non-native English speakers, or rural or remote communities. Again, I've referenced Appendix A several times. Have an opportunity to read through those best practices that are outlined in the appendix. See the connection. There are many of those best practices that include families and how we make that connection to early learning and K-12. So we believe that those are important priorities that should be addressed as we look at implementing House Bill 2013. And we are happy to answer between us. There are 3 of us that were on the subcommittee here who would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
So, Julia?
So just a question to the criteria that was deleted. I was just curious, I'm looking at the purpose statement. The fund's purpose is to promote community and school partnerships and innovations that result in measurable increase in readiness. And then the criteria that was being deleted is applicants having a proven track record of ability to achieve outcomes. I'm just curious why that was deleted as a criteria versus, I could see maybe it's not required but preferred, but to delete it altogether, just curious about the thinking of the...
Right. And it wasn't one of the original criteria that the legislature pointed out. It was ones that were being considered by the subcommittee. And the subcommittee, as they were having their deliberation, they didn't think that was one of the criteria that was most important for us to bring forward to you.
Nicole?
I really like a lot of this work. It's really excellent, and I really appreciate the lens around equity. And kind of following up to Julia's point, one thing that we have learned in philanthropy is actually when we're repeatedly asking for folks to have a commitment around equity, actually the language that you took out, but actually inserting an equity lens in that, saying those with a demonstrated track record and outcomes with communities of color may in fact be helpful, because we've actually seen many projects be funded where folks are well-intentioned, they're trying to meet the criteria to serve communities of color, but they don't have a track record and on occasion have done some harm in those communities. So that just might be something to think about as an addition, but it's really excellent work.
Other questions?
Can I just follow up on the question I had? So I'm just curious, like, why wouldn't that be a priority or a preferred criteria that a organization have a proven track record? It just seems that would be a relevant criteria, not to have it be an excluding criteria, but one that would be relevant to whether they actually might be able to demonstrate results with this grant.
I don't think, obviously we built a lot of our work around research and best practices and proven track record, that kind of thing. I think in the conversation, what I took away from that topic was it was during the time we wanted to make sure we were being inclusive. And we felt that, this is an innovation grant, and it's a grant where we're trying to learn to not only, get resources into this, but to learn from it. We felt like I hear what you're saying, Julie, I don't disagree at all. I'm just telling you, within context of that conversation, it was trying not to be at all exclusive, especially when it was around the idea of innovation and being outside the box a little bit.
Julie, the other point I would add, I think that's right, and I think Hannah mentioned it wasn't a super strong recommendation, but the other point that came out of the conversation was that so many of these partnerships, if you will, between schools and the early learning community or nonprofits are going to be new. And we didn't want to stifle any innovation or new partnerships by giving the impression that folks had to have this track record of working together or any of those kinds of things. So I think that just in the spirit of being inclusive and innovative, we thought that was maybe more limiting, but if the group desires, we can certainly insert it or insert a version of it that makes the most sense.
Yes.
Thank you. I was just going to add to that, just as I was thinking about that question, because that was my original question too, why not have some sort of proven track record? But I think, yeah, if we are trying to make new connections and try to build something that's new, we need to leave that avenue open. And I imagine that a lot of the people that will be involved in this aren't brand new to early learning or to education at all, but will be looking at things in new ways. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Yes.
I was just, I like all of it. I'm wondering in the thinking about scalability and looking for really great innovative ideas, and then thinking about how can they be shared or used. Did the committee have any conversation about how some of the work that might come from grants could perhaps be looked at over time to be shared in a broader way?
I think we do have some follow-up work to do on the evaluation and follow-up on how we can actually scale it up or make sure that we give people information about what's really working. And sharing out data is important in a way that as we're making this transition in Oregon to the P through 20 system, there are a lot of people who really have not connected to have conversations that we really need to make those opportunities available to them, make the time and value it, honor that, so that they can actually build something where, again, parents, students, and educators through the early learning and K-12 are having crucial conversations about how they help each other have students prepared.
Krista, the other thing I would add is that in the memo, the last page right before you get to Appendix A, the very last arrow or bullet under additional criteria talks about those receiving the grant contributing to the knowledge about what's working. So we recommended that as an additional criteria, and I think we were mindful of the fact that this is a new fund that the legislature appropriated money to, and in their wisdom next time they may or they may not appropriate money for this particular fund. We want to be sure to learn from it, not just for the purpose of this fund, but for the work that we're doing as an early learning council where we're trying to help hubs connect to schools in their community. So hopefully we're going to glean that out.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
This is an action item, I believe, so I would like to entertain a motion.
I move that we accept the proposal as presented.
As presented.
Second.
Second by Pam. Any further discussion?
I'd like whenever it is that we do a look back about how our criteria, however we end up, or the grants get dispersed, that they look at the criteria to see whether the criteria effectively led us to a place where we got outcomes, just to have some analysis of, did we hit did we do enough, did the criteria drive innovation, did they drive new partnerships, did it drive outcomes, and whether that should inform sort of a reshaping of the criteria if that's necessary.
So an assessment and a report back and a review.
To me, it seems a little, I get the rationale that's been offered for removing proven track record. It's just, it seems like good practice to have that in there, so I'd like to have a mechanism by which we can just double check our assumptions after we've had a year of grant making.
Thank you. Dick?
To piggyback on that, the sustainability, when this money goes away, you're going to have legs. We discussed it earlier in our ELC meeting, but this is like an initial public offering that we're at. The investments at the front end here, what's going to happen when this money goes away. So the sustainability on the accountability on the outcomes seems to me to be pretty significant.
Thank you. Bobby?
I'd like to pick up on what Dick was talking about in the conversation we had earlier. The programs that seem to have survived in the early learning initiatives that have survived in Oregon have had a limited number of very clear metrics that they could demonstrate to any public or private partner they met. And I just think that's really essential when we build to think. So local applicant can add things, but I think there should be a few that are shared across everyone who receives funds and that they're measured in exactly the same way across communities so that we're finding out if it really did change the conditions for the children or the schools, or, I mean, they can be systematic changes that we want to measure. So it could be relationships between the K-12 system and the early childhood system, or engagement of other partners. I mean, it doesn't all have to be individual child level measures, but whatever the group believes this is the heart of this initiative, that we come up with a few and that measures, and then they are consistently done in every for every grant.
Hannah?
I was just saying, I appreciate that, and it's, I don't hear you saying to limit what you could do, but say there are certain things that we want to see happen, like parent engagement, and how do we measure that? And it may be very different in one situation versus the other, but the idea is we need to have parents early learning and K-12
It
working
could look
together.
different in how it happens,
Yeah.
but the measure should be consistent, so we know we're making a difference in our future.
Which goes with our loose type.
Yeah.
So is that a modification of the motion or just clarification? Okay.
Yeah, before I get to Charles, it does raise the question for me about who is responsible for kind of setting, I mean, as you're making the grants, as we're sending this out to communities, who is responsible? Is it the Early Learning Council? Will staff develop an assessment for the grants? Is that how that will happen?
Yes, so the Early Learning Council is responsible. Once the criteria is approved by both bodies, we will go through a temporary rulemaking process to set the rules for making these grants, and would anticipate making, putting them out after the first of the year. And I'm making those because it seems to me, given the conversation that we've had so far, we can in the application materials ask for a demonstration of ability to achieve outcomes, and ask that for the ability to achieve a limited number of key outcomes. We just had this conversation at the Early Learning Council regarding another fund that is the Early Literacy Fund that's in our purview as well. So,
I guess, Pam, I didn't think we needed to reinvent the wheel. I mean, we've gone through the hub process, which is very, very, very specific. And I felt like, these sorts of, where there's another fund in the future, whatnot, we had the backbone of the hub application process. Did you see it that way?
yes, although we will, the Early Learning Council this afternoon after we leave you will be establishing first round of not all communities at the time that these funds are released are going to have a hub, which is why there's a criteria that talks about aligning either now or in the future with a hub that happens in your community. But we don't want to limit these funds to communities that have a hub established.
See, that's not what I meant. What I meant was we went through that process. We have negotiables, non-negotiables.
Oh, yes.
We have outcomes all through that process that I would think could be transferred quite easily to the fund.
I'm sorry, Mark, I misunderstood what you're saying.
Charles?
Also, something we talked about earlier, there seems to be, from the hub process, some confusion or we need to provide some clarity around, so there's this tension around poverty and race. And in some communities, sort of this feeling that, we won't look at, our native population, whatever population is too small, but we'll just instead focus solely on our sort of poverty groups. And I think maybe just us solely saying, just look at the equity lens, perhaps isn't enough for a lot of folks. So perhaps providing some clarity as to what we're talking about and giving some clear direction might be very helpful.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? Nancy?
I just, Pam, when you summarize, could you say, I think what we said is it shouldn't eliminate if you're new, but that we do want to look at some people who have proven track record as a criteria, not an exclusive one. But I also heard proven track record with children of color or communities of color. Could you include that too? Because with the equity lens, that's just so important to us.
Great.
Thank you.
And I hope with Charles, I didn't think you just specifically looked at this, given the conversation we had earlier, the very last bullet under additional priorities is how the subcommittee tried to phrase this. Well, we talked about it as attention. It doesn't have to be attention, right? Kids of color and kids involved.
If there's no further discussion, I'd like to call for the vote. All those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, and thank you to the subcommittee for your work. And sounds like there's another piece of work yet to be done that has come up in the conversation here today. So we look forward to hearing how the grant making goes and the results of those grants.
Well, I want to thank the OEIB for taking seriously our request to work on something together. We'll look forward to giving you a report about how it's going and so thank you. Thanks especially to Mark and Hannah for participating in this.
Thank you. So I think that concludes our business with the Early Learning Council, and I know you have a meeting to go to, so we'll give you...
I think we're going to hang here and listen to your meeting until the signing of the...
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to change up the agenda a little bit, I think, since we're a little ahead of time. So, what would you suggest? Should we do that?
Yeah, why don't we do that?
So I think we'll, Seth, if you are available, we'll do the roll call right now so that we can move into the official business of the OEIB.
Governor Kitzhofer. Julia Brim Edwards.
Present.
Yvonne Curtis.
Present.
Matt Donegan. Samuel Henry. Nicole June Maher.
Present.
Mark Moghill.
Present.
David Reeves.
Here.
Ron Saxton. Mary Spilding.
Here.
Kate Duran. Hannah Vendry.
Here.
Dick Wisnell.
There's just two people now.
Okay, thank you. So let's move to the approval of the minutes for the October board meeting. A motion to approve.
So moved.
Moved by Mark.
Second.
Second by Hannah. All those in favor of approving the minutes, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Let's move then to our subcommittee update, and we'll start with Dr. Curtis, Best Practices in Student Transitions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Vice Chair. I'm really excited to be able to share with the OEIB. I was not present in the first meeting, and thanks, Mark, for filling in for me. As we met in the second meeting, we added some clarity around our charge. And so I'd like to refer you to two documents. One is in Section 4, and the other one's in Section 5. If you look at the one in Section 5 first, you'll see it's kind of a color-coded Excel spreadsheet document that will take you through, on the left-hand side, the dates of our meetings, and then in the light blue, the kinds of things that we're going to look at in terms of committee logistics and OEIB research and policy agenda, and then we go through some very specific categories. We are very focused on the new part added to our charge around student transitions. So you'll see we have in the yellow column K to 12 student transitions, and then the student transitions from 11 to 14. We think there's work going on in the educator quality area that does speak to student transitions as well as best practice, so that's an area we'll look at. One that we've added and asked to have added to our foci for our charge is the business of transforming learning through digital conversion. In the past, we've talked about e-learning, technology integration, and some various ways of talking about it. And there isn't a growing body of research and school district folks, along with other partners, looking at the whole idea of this is beyond just what is the device and getting devices. This is about really transforming learning as we prepare kids for college and their careers, integrating the use of technology, whatever that might be at any given time. The other thing we plan to take a good look at is rural and remote communities and perhaps challenges and issues that need to be addressed in policy and recommendation. I won't take you through the whole document, but if you go down each column, you'll see it gets to an area in bold where there is a statement that says when we will come back to OEIB with either some recommendations or some ideas around policy that we think need to be developed. If you flip back to the page under section 4, you can see that a couple of, there was an original document that had the foci and we've added a couple to them, and they're the ones that are the bullets at the top. One is around making recommendations regarding the communication best practice and evaluation of the kindergarten readiness data and the Oregon EL strategic plan. As we all know, given our first conversation today, there's a lot of work happening around the early learning piece, and it's focused on this idea of kindergarten readiness. What is kindergarten readiness? And we have an assessment this year. There's been a lot of questions about the data, use of data, who will see that, and so on. And we know that ODE and Early Learning Council all are working together to take a look at this first round of KRA that everybody had to participate in, and then what does that data look like and how will we use that to the best of our ability for decision making. The other area that's related to that is last year the OEIB approved the Oregon EL strategic plan. It's firmly embedded in Oregon Department of Education work. In fact, there's key people focused on that work. And we've asked the group to put together a report that would come to OEIB, would come to our panel first, that shows the state of ELLs and the progress that's being made on that strategic plan. So that's under that first bullet. The second bullet is the transform learning through digital conversion I spoke about just a few minutes ago. And then the other bullets talk about all of those transition points that I already highlighted. A couple other things just really quickly I wanted to mention that happened at our last meeting. We had the opportunity to hear about some of the wonderful collaborative work going on in the higher education institutions, specifically around teacher preparation programs. And I've heard the question asked on the OEIB board several times, like, where does private fit into this, private colleges? And we heard some reports about great work happening that is collaborative work between public and private teacher preparation programs, as well as some work with Chalkboard on the Teach Oregon. So great examples of collaborative work. We're hoping that those groups in that work will identify policy issues, barriers, or challenges that they might bring to our committee, and then we'll bring them forward. I would like to recommend, when I saw the presentations at our last committee meeting, I realized that a lot of that work's been going on behind the scenes, and we haven't had a lot of conversation about it at this level, at the OEIB. And I know last year we had a lot of presentations and said maybe we don't want to fill up our meetings with presentations, but I certainly think that there is some great work going on there that I think this whole board would be really interested in knowing what that collaborative work looks like and what are some of those desired outcomes between the higher ed institutions and teacher prep programs, Chalkboard, TSPC, and all that work that's sort of folding in together to create this seamless system. So I'm not exactly sure when that would make sense, but I just think that in addition to us bringing some recommendations or some policy ideas, that this whole board gets a chance to see a little bit deeper dive into the work that's going on, because I think it's an area we haven't really taken a deep dive on yet. It was interesting as we heard the reports, one of the points made, and I think it's really important to our seamless work as we think about this birth to career seamless system we're creating, is that when we work in isolation, there are issues that never get dealt with because they either if we're in the K-12 world, we're saying, well, this isn't really part of our charge. Or if we're in the higher ed or teacher prep programs, we're saying, well, this isn't really part of our charge either. But when we're all together in the same room, we say, this is the work of our entire profession. So where is the accountability and responsibility going to live? And when we work collaboratively, we can all own it jointly instead of kind of pointing fingers that it needs to be somewhere else. So that was one of what I thought was a real key conversation. That was becoming more and more aware to me as I was hearing what the groups were doing. So I just wanted to highlight that. And just to say that I will also continue to listen as the other groups report out about places for crossover joint meetings, just like we did today. We're looking forward to some follow-up between the Best Practice and Transitions Committee to work with the Early Learning Council to work jointly on that idea of identifying the issues, looking for policy implications, and also for investments. And we know there's a great deal of crossover between all of our committees. So we look forward to that coming up, I believe, in December for us meeting with Early Learning. And I will listen to the rest of the reports. So if you're on other committees giving those reports, please feel free to specifically ask for that kind of crossover in our meetings. I think that we can move along much quicker if we do that. That's all I have for today.
Thanks, Yvonne. Any questions or comments? Yes, Nancy.
Yvonne, I was just thinking, when you're talking about the kindergarten assessment, that's a great opportunity to work side by side with early learning. Again, I know they were majorly involved and invested. I know Dick represents us as the crossover person, but that might be another one to zigzag back and forth and have a joint meeting about.
That's exactly, I think, what our intention is in December. We know that the work is happening somewhere else, but we think that the part that's important for our committee to do is to be informed about where issues, barriers, challenge, policy implications, those kinds of things are coming up. And we think that we can do that jointly and they can highlight those for us. So that's perfect.
I think we look forward to that.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Just something that Yvonne brought up. She brought up the idea of the presentations that we've had in the past and how we've kind of gotten away from having those. And I would just say, I don't mind the presentations, but I'd like to see an involved conversation with those people who come. It always felt like we were being talked at and not with, and not that they were trying to do that, but I don't think we really were prepared to engage with them, and I think that would really help us as a board understand what's going on out in the field a little better. So I don't mind the presentations, and I'd like to see us
have a dialogue.
Yeah. Even maybe get up out of our seats and talk.
Don's got her hand up. Good. Thank you.
If I could just add one more piece, you just reminded me of a part that I wanted to share. We are also starting a process with that committee. We have kind of a discussion sheet where we're highlighting before we begin a presentation what is it we hope to learn from this, so that committee members actually do get a chance to play a more active role in discussions. So it's something we could share with the whole OEIB. But the way it plays out is we know a presentation is coming up. We've seen some documents ahead of time. So what we would do is spend a minute at the beginning just jotting down what are the things I'm going to listen for, where are my questions before we enter into the presentation. And then as we're going through the presentation, a place to just kind of record what am I learning about that I didn't know about before when I read through this the first time. That prepares us for a really deeper conversation as a committee, because then we say, did I hear the things I needed to? What are my remaining questions? What did I learn that I didn't know before? And then the fourth one is, what am I learning from my colleagues on the board or the committee as we're having this conversation? It helps us, I think, be more focused rather than just seeing a presentation and saying, thank you very much, looks like great work, but we don't really know what our role is. So we can share that, but I just wanted you to know we are using that process in our committee.
Thanks, Yvonne. And I just want to say I really appreciate the organization of the work plan for those members of the OEIB who are not on the committee. It's really clear what you're working on and what your timelines are for coming back to the full board. So I really appreciate that organization, and thanks to whoever developed the template.
That's thanks to Hilda.
Thank you, Hilda.
She's really the worker behind the scenes
Great.
here.
That's the key to a successful committee.
Absolutely.
That's right.
So thank you. I think that's very helpful. So let's move on to Nicole, equity and partnerships.
So I'm pleased to announce that we adopted our work plan this morning. I think we are making. My voice definitely cannot project to the back of this room. I was sharing that I'm pleased to announce that we have adopted our purpose and scope of work this morning. We'll have a few edits, but you all should be seeing that soon. It's in a very similar format to what you just looked at. Again, we are committing to really 4 focused areas of work. First and foremost, we are looking at supporting and continuing to promote the equity lens and support different aspects of the system to implement and utilize that. Really speaking to Charles's comments earlier, it's great to have an equity lens. We're very proud of it. It's very easy for folks to look at that and either say, I'm already doing it, or if I do 1 or 2 things, then I am doing it. And we know that there are many aspects to that tool and want to not only hold folks accountable, but support them to be successful using that tool. We also recognize that it's very, very important that the equity lens be fully implemented throughout early childhood into higher education. We are working on 3 policy areas over the next year. One of those will be really bringing forward a policy around the intersection between disability and race and the overrepresentation of students of color on IEPs. We'll be working on a policy around parent and community partnership, which will include clear definitions of what partnership is, community engagement, so that all of our systems are working from a shared framework, and then what the policies and expectations are around that. And then a really important focus and policy of ours, which at this point we're referring to as out-of-school youth, but we'd like to think about a different way to reflect on that term, will be another emphasis. I'll share a little bit about a presentation we had today. We actually heard in detail about the efforts that City Club is leading around the GED for the state of Oregon and the proposed changes to the GED in 2014, because we, as the OEIB, we recognize that we have a little higher than a 60% graduation rate statewide. Most of our work thus far has really been in reference to students who are in school, but when we are looking at our high school age population, we recognize that a little less than 40% of them are not in school. Earlier this year, we had a presentation on disproportionate discipline, which really demonstrated that we're losing significant numbers of young people in middle school. And so when you have such a large number of folks who are not in school, it's important that we're having very real conversations about what options exist for those young people. And so it was a really fascinating conversation. City Club is doing an in-depth report. One of the requests that we will be making to this full OEIB is that that same presentation come before this entire board in the lens that they're looking at, which is young people 16 to 25. We have about 340,000 people who are not in school in this state in that age group. And certainly we all can look at that number and think about the statistics and recognize how difficult it will be to get to 40-40-20 without having very real conversations about what options those young people have. So it was a really interesting presentation, and I think will be really important to the success of not just the equity committee, but every committee for OEIB to be thinking about. And then the other piece I would just share is that for the month of December, we are planning on having a working meeting. Our work plan's pretty clear about the policy focus areas we have, but we'd like to really go in depth about what does it need to pass those policies, but what work will need to happen prior and after. And if others are interested in joining us for that, we welcome you, but it will be a working meeting.
Thanks, Nicole. Any comments or questions for Nicole? Seeing none?
Yeah. I actually just have
One more thing
to share. And I think this is relevant to all of our committees. As we got through our agenda and began to think about sort of the ambitious policy areas we were focusing on and recognizing the pressure I think that we've experienced as a committee for folks who really want to come and make presentations, and the passion that many folks have in the community around other priorities for equity, I just think it's going to be really important for OEIB and also our committee to really limit and focus what we want to work on. And I know that's something that we're going to be striving to do on the equity committee. But I just think that that's going to be an ongoing challenge for this group, because we could hear multiple presentations and really try to have a very thin approach to all of the important equity issues that exist, and I don't think we'll have the same impact. So I think we're going to really try to focus on these areas and make a meaningful impact. And so I share that because all of you are probably going to have requests and suggestions for topics and items that you will want to bring to the equity committee meeting. And while they probably will be very important and really relevant, it will be important to know that we are going to really use the lens of our work plan, and if they're related to the areas we talked about, we will welcome you. If they're not, we'll thank you and find out more so that perhaps we can think about putting it on the agenda for next year.
Thank you. Okay, let's move to Dick, the Outcomes and Investments Committee.
Thank you, Chair. Today we didn't meet because half of our committee was in the air and just barely walked in here. So at the last meeting, though, we did this review and discuss the draft the advancement compact scoreboard with Dave Edwards, who's our support person. And next month we'll be talking about the final review to bring here to the OEIB, as well as the database that we'll be talking about with Peter Tromba. And we'll update the Achievement Compact Assessment Plan. Our bottom line is, of course, this is what the subcommittee's name is to outcomes and investments, and see if we're on goal for the 40-40-20. And it's a challenge to our commission here to have these results, because we're actually a scoreboard also, so we'll be keeping track. The rest of the team members, yes.
Dick, our strategic plan has 6 months and annual goals to them. Are you guys reviewing that?
Yes,
Are you reviewing the 6 month and the...
Yes, and we also will have data that we'll be able to share with you too. We want to get a baseline. First of all, a baseline, see whether or not we're going north or south, and we need to share. We need to cross-pollinate those different goals on our different subcommittees.
I know that's something that I really liked when we developed that, the strategic plan, and I believe the ELL plan also has 6 month goals, does it not? I can't remember, but anyway,
okay.
It's nice to have those indicators. I know Nancy's tracking those as well, and I think that would be something that would be a nice report out.
Any other comments or questions for Dick? If not, I'm going to ask Nancy to give her report. That I know the governor wants to be here for the Youth Development Council report, but he's splitting his time today between the Early Learning Council and the OEIB. So he should be here within a few minutes for the ceremonial signing, but until that time, Nancy, if you could give the report, that would be great.
Yeah. Just as closure to the conversations we had, and particularly around reports, there'll be some reports we need to give, but we would love to hear more from you about what are the reports you think would be most important to really help inform your thinking. So at any time, if you have a particular area you want to hear a report on, please let me know or let Whitney know, and we'll make sure we get them to you. And we heard the idea of making sure it's dialogue. So if you want to move to tab 7, that's the October update. As you know, I'm doing updates each month that coordinate with my 6-month strategic plan. And I wanted to, as you can see from all of the updates, I've been spending a lot of time in the community, from Eastern Oregon to Portland and lots of other places tonight. I'm in a community forum with the Latino community. I'm very excited about that. Doris has done a fabulous job at setting that up. And so much of what I've been doing is listening and also helping people understand what does the OEIB really do, since we did receive information that wasn't clear to everyone. But after a few months, things start emerging that are things I think we really need to think about, or that I see as important for me to share with you. So the first thing I do want to talk about is, so you have this because this will help us. In front of you is the revised pamphlet based on the feedback that you gave us. So this is sort of the first piece other than the OEIB bulletin that we'll be putting out. And I do want to point some things out in this. So the first thing, if you just look at the cover, I say, is that about the cutest young boy you've ever seen? I said, the only one cuter are my grandchildren, your grandchildren, and your children, right? And the point behind this is every child deserves a quality education in Oregon, and we really do believe that prepared students means a prosperous Oregon. If you look inside, I think what's at stake is one of the most important panels in this, because what this really talks about is the 35% of our students who are from community of colors, are immigrant or English language learners, and because we haven't always been able to bring the resources they need to them, we find that those kids are in the gap, and that's not okay, and we need to work really hard to make sure we help our children in the gap move out using skill and partnership. And I will say that in going around the state, there are multiple partners who really have made tremendous differences, have strong outcomes in working with these children that we need to really stay very closely aligned with, because it's going to take this sort of partnership to make sure we have no students in the gap. In addition to that, we do know the vision's 40-40-20. And then if you start looking at the pathway, again, this is meant to be written in a way that's understandable for people who do not come to all of these meetings or aren't deeply immersed in it. So we want more students ready for school, more third grade readers at above grade level, more ninth grade students finishing on track with credits and strong attendance, high school graduation and college completion rates to increase, and more Oregonians earning degrees and certificates to lead to rewarding jobs. And that's the pathway we talk so much about. It's the seamless pathway, and we know our work is really managing successfully the transition and overcome barriers. If you look at this next panel, which has an explanation point, an accelerate point, and a question mark, I think these really speak to the strategies we're going to use. The advocate, we are an investment board. We have to learn from people, and then we need to find out what are the things that we need to invest in that are going to make the biggest difference in our students moving along that pathway. The acceleration really comes when we create a seamless system where we overcome barriers and we use those tremendous partners that we have in our communities. And engage, the question mark is there's still a lot for us to learn, and the way we're going to learn that is if we engage in our community. The note from the governor really talks about the American dream, that every child should have a quality education, that every American should prosper, that everyone can prosper. We think that's a very important message. And then if you look at the back, these little red writings to me is something very compelling, because every Oregon student deserves a high quality education, because education should be a priority for all our students statewide, because our economy grows when we have an educated and trained workforce, because Oregon should be rated at the top of education, not at the bottom, because the jobs of tomorrow take new skills. So I really want to thank everyone who worked on this, particularly Kristen and Ann, who you met at the last meeting, because I do think this does create clarity about things that have not been clear. So again, that's our pamphlet. We will be distributing them widely as soon as we get more printed up. And one of the things in going around, I've started to hear loud and clear, is that we do need a statewide technology plan. Their technology can transform learning. Again, from our perspective, because we're a policy and investment board, it would be the biggest picture of, as a state, how should we be leading technology in a way it can impact the skills that our students have. I did talk to the governor about that. He also thought that that was a very good idea. And it really means bringing together people, many people in this room, but other people who really are innovators in the area of technology. We are a startup state. We have a lot of new startups. So that is something that I think we need to do. I don't think we can really wait on that. The other thing which goes a lot along with what's at stake here is right now, in terms of working with the Oregon Department of Education, we identify our schools in the lower 15%, and then we provide them support and guidance. So what about the schools in the 16% or the 17% or the 18%? Shouldn't my child, if they sit in a school at an 18%, get the same kind of support of a school that sits in the 15%? So I think we really have to start talking about those schools that, if we look at the state report card, end up with a score of 1. I think we have to look at this from the highest poverty level using the equity lens. So that is something else that we'll be starting to do. And then the last thing I do want to mention, I think all of you who have been involved in this from the beginning, starting, I think it was last year, Hannah, you can help me, but Linda Darling Hammond, it was last year, right? Who is just an absolute expert, I think internationally known as one of the best. We started some work with her, and I talked to her recently, and we're going to reboot that work. Linda really believes that there's a tremendous opportunity right now working with the federal government to really work to understand what is the kind of assessment that can really inform instruction, and are there assessments that make more sense that we should be doing in a way that could really benefit our students much more directly. So we are in conversation with her and very excited about re-engaging with her. So any questions about any of that from the board? Yvonne?
I just wanted to ask kind of a wondering question about that work with Linda Darling Hammond. That sounds really exciting, and it makes me think about the work we're already doing, especially at transitions on 11 to 14 through the HEC and higher ed. And so in addition to assessments that inform instruction, I guess I would just add the hope that it keeps all educators on point and not having to go down these other sort of diversionary trails, that they could stay on point with what they're doing in their classroom, but that there's also that alignment all the way through the system, so that kids aren't being asked to, for example, respond to different kinds of tests. Once they jump through one hoop, then they're jumping through another one. And I know that's our goal as a state, but as we work with her on that piece, I'm just curious at the federal level what that work looks like.
Great.
2 comments, Nancy. First of all, tremendous document. Last time we talked about it being a bit wordy, and what I see is a lot of the feedback that emerged during that previous conversation has been woven into this document. I think it's excellent. Nice work. Nice shout out for all those who participated on that. Second thing, Nancy, when we talked about when you came into the position, there were a couple areas that we really wanted you to focus on. That was visibility and connections. And as I look at your October update, I'm really impressed with the mileage you put in. You know, obviously you had the tour in Eastern Oregon that went extremely well, but I've repeatedly heard from, in my world, administrators and staff that your term barrier buster has been extremely well received around the state. I think people have been heard and valued, and you're off to a great start along these lines. And I think this document that you brought to us only reinforces that.
Mark, one thing I should have said, so me and all of the staff from OEIB, which is about 8 of us, when we're out, we write down whatever barriers we've heard, and we're rising those up. We can't approach every barrier at once, so we're really trying to find the themes that we think most need to be looked at to make that smooth success along the pathway. So we are capturing that work, and we've actually put it in to a chart, and I think at some point we'll be bringing it back, and it would be a really good conversation with the board to really say, so which of these do we really want to significantly work on? Are there some that needs investments? Are there others that need a policy change, a legislative change? So we'll continue to do that.
Seth, is the governor here?
On his way.
Okay. So one last comment, I think, and then we'll break so that we're ready for him. Hannah?
So Nancy, I think it's more than the mileage, it's the real conversations that you're having as well. I think Mark hit it, that people have, everything that I've heard is you engage in a conversation, you care what people have to say, you may not have the same viewpoint, but they know that you care, so thank you for that. I just want, I left the last meeting after the First Lady was here talking about prosperity. And I went and did a little bit more research about poverty in Oregon. We have our equity lens and we have poverty issue in Oregon. And we can't do one and not the other. We need to do both. We have to address the federal poverty level, $22,351 for a family of 4. That's the federal poverty limit. So, and when you look at that, and you know that almost 24% of our students are living in poverty, can you imagine living, family of 4, with $23,351? I'm not sure that's even reasonable. 50% of our students or our children are either poor or low income in this state. 177,886 children live in poverty. It's a 12% increase over last year. And these statistics come from Children's First Oregon. So I appreciate that. The one highlight that I saw, and kudos to the governor for this, it is healthcare for children. That our state leads the way in actually having healthcare for children. But I really hope, we had Donna Beagle come and speak to this board really early on, and I'm not sure that we followed up to address the issue of poverty in Oregon, and I think we're never going to get to 40-40-20 if we don't have that conversation as well. And the last thing that I'll say is I've been out a lot around the state talking with especially K-12 educators, and it is more like March than November. People are worn out. It is crazy right now with everything that's going on. Teacher evaluation, Common Core. If you haven't heard of Synergy, you will if you walk into a school that's implementing Synergy. But the stress level is so high right now, and that it cannot stay away from our students when people are that stressed. We've got to find a way to slow things down and get it right and make sure that educators have what they need to be successful. So I hope that as we do our work as a board, that we really focus on those things that are really going to move the dial for students and maybe get away from some of this stuff that is paperwork and stress for teachers.
Thanks, Hannah. Just have Nancy wrap up her report.
Yeah, just last thing, I just want to welcome everyone from the Early Learning Council and let you know what an extraordinarily important day I think this is as we learn about the hubs. I mean, what we know is if we get those first measures right, ready to learn, and reading at 3rd grade, the rest of the trajectory is so much better. So thank you for your extraordinary work. We're really counting on your partnership and really make sure we can get all our students ready to kindergarten, ready to learn. So.
Thank you, Nancy. Governor, I'll turn it over to you, and we're back up to the second item on the agenda, the ceremonial.
Governor, everyone else, this is Kay Turan. I just phoned in.
Welcome, Kay.
Thank you, Kay.
Thank you.
So, I'm sorry, I got a little. So would you just catch me up where we are because I have no idea.
So, we completed the first item, which was the joint meeting with the Early Learning Council, and approved the recommendations regarding the Kindergarten Partnership and Innovation Fund. Because we got through that quite speedily, we did the roll call of the board, the approval of the minutes. We have just completed the subcommittee updates, and we jumped to Nancy's report because we know you want to come back at 3 o'clock for the Youth Development Council report. So I think we're into the ceremonial bill signing, and then I think you're going to go off with the Early Learning Council after that has occurred.
Okay, we're doing the bill signing here.
Right.
Okay, when I had our briefing, I thought I was leaving and coming back, so we're doing it right here. So that's what we're going to do right now.
That's right. We'll do right now.
Right.
Great.
I don't think we need a podium. Is the speaker here? She's not here. Who do we have from the legislature? I see Representative Lively. Who's already back there? Great. Well, and where are we going to sign this bill? Just out of curiosity. We're going to sign it right here? Okay. Now I'm ready. Great. All right. So I want to make sure the legislators get up here. So let me just say that we have made some remarkable progress over the last 3 legislative sessions in trying to develop a seamless outcomes-based system of public education. And we've, I think, done in this last session a remarkable job taking a whole disparate set of programs and trying to align them around common outcomes and trying to ensure the level of accountability that we expect of ourselves and I think that Oregonians expect of us. I'm convinced that of all the elements of the work that we've done, the success or failure of our vision for K-12 education depends on the success of children before they get to school. It is absolutely foundational. If we can't make that happen, the rest of it is really sort of an apostrophe. And House Bill 2013 gives us the ability to actually move this agenda forward around a common objective, which is ready for success at kindergarten. And I just got the tail end of the conversation that President Andrew was making, but she's absolutely right that the elephant in the living room here is poverty in Oregon. I was speaking to AOI a couple of days ago, and we were talking about the economic recovery, and I said recovery is the wrong word to use in a state with a 24% childhood poverty rate. We cannot achieve this objective just through the educational system. It requires those wraparound services. It requires identifying and providing whatever services are necessary to these families to make sure that these children have an opportunity to be successful. And so it's just wonderful to be able to have this ceremonial signing of this bill. I was hoping that Speaker Kotek could be there because there has been no greater champion of this effort than Tina Kotek. Her leadership in really pushing for uncomfortable change, in changing the conversation, made this bill really a reality. And we have some tremendous legislators behind us here who are also instrumental. And I'm just delighted that you're here today, and I want to thank you for your tremendous leadership and role in making this happen. I got a whole bunch of them.
Only one pen this time.
We want to make sure that this bill stays signed. So we're going to sign it a lot of times. Curious to know who calculated the exact number of bills that needed to be signed here. Like someone said, 15 to 20 should be enough. All right, congratulations. Pens falling everywhere. Hey, do you legislators want one of these great pens here? I happen to have a lot. If you don't want it, you can there's always eBay. Let's see.
Thank you. I'll give it to
There you go.
Sarah.
And I'll keep one for the speaker. Oh, okay. Okay, now I'm being dismissed. It's sort of sad to know that you can operate probably even more efficiently without.
We'll see you at 3.
See you at 3. Yeah. This is confusing. Why don't we take a 5-minute break so that the room can be cleared? So we're going to bring this meeting back into session. And we've been very efficient in moving through the agenda today. So at this point, we're going to move on to item 8, which is the Achievement Compact Research Plan. I'd like to welcome Dave Edwards, our Director of Research and Policy, to present to us. Dave?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, board members. It's a pleasure to be here in this role. Some of you may have been familiar with me during my tenure as a legislator back in 2007 to 2010. So I thought before I presented the Achievement Compact Research Plan, I would quickly highlight my relevant experience in public and commercial research. So briefly, I earned my master's degree in public affairs with a concentration in social and political research from the University of Oregon. Soon thereafter, I worked for the Oregon Economic and Community Development Department, as it was then called, as a legislative analyst and researcher, exploring the potential for key Oregon industries to replace declining timber revenue. Then I went into commercial market research for about 18 years, during which time I started my own firm, which I ran for 10 years. I worked primarily...
Hi, this is Kay again. Have we started?
We have. Thank you, Kay. Dave Edwards, we're on item 8 in the agenda, and Dave Edwards is giving a report.
Okay, thank you.
So during the time I owned my own market research firm, I worked exclusively with high-tech companies like Microsoft, Yahoo, eBay, and others. About 80% of our research was on new product development or innovation. About 25%, or about 10% was on marketing, and the remainder was related to customer satisfaction and loyalty. I then served as a project manager for the report card redesign process for the Oregon Department of Education, and then thereafter was soon hired in this role. The main purpose of the research plan I put before you is to assess our progress on 40-40-20 and in the use of the Achievement Compacts in that regard. Dr. Golden has tasked me with 3 chief questions to answer. First is, what was the process by which Achievement Compact targets were set? To answer that question, I've devised a combination of quantitative and qualitative research. I'll be developing and distributing a survey for stakeholders who participate in the Achievement Compact development process. And I'm currently in the midst of conducting interviews with representatives from key K-12 districts, community colleges, and OUS institutions. Second question is around which educational institutions have done better than expected, and might offer some model strategies to advance our 40-40-20 goal. And to answer that question, I've proposed doing a project to identify those educational institutions using some modeling. For K-12 districts, I intend to use a revised version of the model developed by Brian Reeder at the Oregon Department of Education. The model will help us identify how like districts perform on key metrics and accordingly allow us to identify those whose students have performed better than projections would suggest based on demographics, funding levels, and other pertinent factors. And for the 2-year and 4-year institutions, I'll be identifying the model programs based on their results in regard to historically underserved student populations. The last question has to do with what the outcomes suggest about how to maximize our return on investment. And to answer that question, I'll be developing a resource allocation model in 2 phases. The first phase will really be designed to understand whether the metrics that are currently part of the Achievement Compacts are the most telling metrics in terms of predicting the 40-40-20 outcomes. The second phase of the model will be a simulator which will allow us to adjust different inputs, such as human capital, specific education interventions, and other changes to the education continuum, and assess their likely impact on the 40-20 goal. In addition to the Achievement Compact research I'm currently conducting, I also have a number of other projects on my plate. Firstly, I'll be evaluating select strategic initiative efforts directly, rather than simply relying on data from grant recipients. I'll be identifying some key areas for deep dive research, particularly in the areas of key transition points, such as kindergarten readiness, high school graduation, and retention in the early years of higher education. And then I'm currently working on developing some logic models which show the demonstrable or predicted impacts of strategic initiatives and other interventions such as the chalkboard projects, class schools, and implementation of response to intervention or RTI.
Any questions, comments? Mark?
David, right early, in our early start with OEIB, we saw a presentation called the dashboard, and it was the return on investment piece. And that always captivated me when it showed the livability of the state and how it went up, like for 3rd grade reading. Are you going to crosswalk with that at all?
Madam Chair, Dr. Mulvihill, and board members, yes. So I've been exposed to the model. I think what was missing from the model was the interventions or the inputs that would dictate how the needle on the 40-40-20 goal would be adjusted. So while I thought the model was productive in terms of modeling potential scenarios, it didn't provide a way to look at the 40-40-20 goal strategically in terms of what exactly we should recommend in terms of investments or budget for particular programs.
I would say too that I think that I don't know that the board ever saw the kind of the final product. We saw very much a work in progress, but I don't know that we ever saw a completed product, and I don't know how far along the work is, and if that's possible.
Well, that product never did get completed, but what he's doing will complete it. I mean, when he was talking there, so we will show that to you. And he certainly will draw from what we saw on that, but that was just kind of the possibility of what could happen, and then we never really data wasn't populated or anything, so, but you will be able to see that.
Okay. Julia?
Question. And you can tell me whether this is sort of outside the scope, but with regards to some of the specific Achievement Compact metrics, for example, the 6 credit attainment for the freshman year, I'm wondering if you're looking at things, I know some districts have specificity in what the 6 credits are, so it may matter more that you get 6 credits in this set of classes, biology, language arts, algebra, versus 6 credits in something else. And I'm wondering if you're going to look sort of at the granularity of any of the metrics when you're looking at the achievement compacts, or is that something that would be within the scope?
Madam Chair, Ms. Edwards, and board members, yes, it is well within the scope of my current project. As I mentioned, the first phase of my achievement compact assessment research involves conducting 25 interviews, 15 among K-12 districts, 5 among community college representatives, and 5 among OUS representatives. And during my conversations with the K-12 district representatives, I've had some discussions about the need for more detailed or uniform definitions of some of the metrics, including the one you brought up.
Can I ask a follow-up
Yeah,
question?
go ahead.
And then just shifting to the community sort of college level, what about, or maybe not just community college because that's too restrictive, but the capturing of certificates and apprenticeship data, is that something that you'd be looking at, like how well we're capturing it versus just what we've captured? Do you understand the question?
Yeah,
So not just the number, but like, are we actually capturing the accurate number on things that are a little bit more difficult to measure? Not just, you want to answer this, I can tell.
I mean, it's appropriate for me to speak on. I think the issue is, and Peter's working on this very hard. I mean, I think the issue is the certificate, the industry certificates are probably the most important, most difficult for all of us. I mean, we certainly have apprenticeship data, we certainly have certificate data on the ones that we have inside the system. The notion of, I mean, where we are with industry? I mean, do we have auto mechanics who have ASC certification, for example? Those are certificates that are incredibly validating, and oftentimes we've heard presentations from employers who say that's what they really care about. So those are the things that are more difficult.
And do you contemplate looking at this in the scope of your study?
Yes, Madam Chair, board members, I have kind of formed an educational data trust. That is, I've formed a group that we meet monthly with my counterparts in ODE, CCWD, and OUS to discuss these very issues. Part of it is an issue of definition. And part of it is an issue of data collection. So I'll be bringing issues like this to that group that we can work out and identify uniform solutions.
What's your timeline? Sorry. What's the timeline?
Madam Chair, Dr. Mulcahill, and board members, the timeline is specified on the document, so my initial deliverables will be due to Dr. Golden on December 20th, and depending on how much rewriting she asks me to do, you should see it in either January or February.
Great, thank you. Hannah?
Just a quick follow-up, because we talked about the K-12 and community college areas. So if you're doing the interviews, can you explain to the board, because you were doing more than just one person per district, can you explain a little more about how you're going about those interviews with districts?
Sure, Madam Chair, board members. The interviews vary somewhat by district, and I have asked that I'm able to interview 2 to 3 board members of the local Achievement Compact Committee at a time. In some cases, schedules didn't work out, so I'm actually doing consecutive interviews with some districts. But in the main, I'm talking with at least 2 people, and ideally 3 people in each case. So the 25 interviews listed here actually is more akin to 35 or 40 interviews.
Answer yours.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions for Dave? Okay, well, we'll look forward to seeing the results in January or February.
Okay.
Thank you.
2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2. 2
Okay, that moves us to item 9 on the agenda, and Rob Saxton went to join the Early Learning Council because he has some remarks to make regarding the hubs that are being discussed right now. So if we can get back to him later in the day, we will. If not, we will defer his report until next time. But in the meantime, Gerald Hamilton, Community Colleges and Workforce Development.
Thank you, Mary. I'll add a few points, certainly not all the work we do, but some of what I think is the very important work that is being done recently in CCWD. And first I'd start with some work that Elizabeth Cox-Brand is doing around DevEd. And you know, one of the things that I've talked to you about is how you know, one of the plans that I brought was how can we deal with development.
And what's DevEd?
Developmental education. I mean, our pre-college programs. I'm sorry, we get used to saying that, and we tend to say it. But our pre-college programs and moving students from to college-ready work. An enormous amount of investment in the colleges is made in those programs that are basically start oftentimes with middle school math, and math is the hard pathway. All up into to get them to college level algebra. So a lot of work being done. We have groups coming in from around the state to work on a model that we can then just give back to the colleges, through to the colleges, around best practices for developmental education. We heard national experts talk about how do we do that with some more time, some intensive time. A lot of work around integration of the developmental programs and the content areas as well. So I think that's really powerful work. If faculty members and administrators are working on that together. So I'm really looking forward to that work, and we expect to report by the end of this fiscal year. Secondly, I would point to some work we're doing with Representative Gorsuch on House Bill 3149. The child care legislation for community colleges. And I was, you know, we had a great presentation at the last committee meeting last week, and I was really dumbfounded by the cost of child care. I mean, those of us with gray hair, it's been a long time since I had children in child care. But they're talking about, say what, $1,000 a month per student, or per child, excuse me. So if you talk about a family with 2 children, and I think about where I was a community college president, I had lots of students who had family, and were living on financial aid or some method of very small part-time work and trying to manage school. Asking them to put $1,000 per child into some kind of child care was just impossible. And we talked about how do students arrange schedules to where they can minimize that to 2 days a week, and that really limits them in the colleges. And so the question is, you heard the term today, how can we offer bigger, broader wraparound services to students and ultimately increase completion significantly? I mean, and I just think about the students that I had that needed that type of service. We are bringing back our student success group and a group that's working on around primarily a grant and associated with Lane Community College around opening up some student success centers. We hope that really leads us to some better completion numbers. We continue to work real hard on the 12-13 transition point. Rob and I are going to bring back a group of superintendent presidents to talk about, again, you know, Nancy's use of barriers. What barriers do we have to deal with that? How as community college folks and CCWD in particular folks deal with that transition point? And are there things that are causing the high school to not allow students to work in that college credit world? And are there ways that we can help that transition point? Hoping that as we move forward, that we'll see more than 9 credits. I know that's the number that is oftentimes on compat, but is that enough? Ought there be more? I suggest that there should be. You know, I've certainly seen students that have graduated the transfer module, and I know Nancy talked about, can we get that 45-hour transfer module to students in a way that makes sense to them and that they're able to complete it. And I've seen students do it. It is possible. So I think we're going to have a broader conversation with that. COSA is supporting that work, and it's exciting for us to. I think exciting to see how that transition worked out. And I know that there's lots of groups working on that, and I think that there seems to be a lot of energy there. Continue to work with yours OEIB staff on college and career ready definitions. I think there's a definition that's out there that's pretty well vetted now. There is currently soliciting feedback from the colleges on is it an appropriate definition, and it's been a lot of work to try to figure out what is a student makes a student college and or career ready. So that's being done, and I think it's going to have a positive result as well. Not to steal Ben's thunder on HEC report, we didn't talk, but we're working with HEC on Common Course numbering. That report will be out very, very soon, as well as prior learning. And I think the prior learning group has a real potential to foster some really positive ways to get students completion. And with that, I'll just mention the last thing and then move on. We do a lot of work with, in the last session, all the colleges got their capital allotments that they need to match to be able to do capital improvements in their campus. So we can do a lot of work with colleges around what is an appropriate match, how to help them get their match, and so on and so forth. So with that, I answer the questions and let me move forward.
Thank you, Gerald. Any comments or questions? If not, since the governor is back, Iris, if your group is ready, if they're here, then let's go ahead and have this important presentation.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Iris Bell, and I am the Director of Youth Development Council, and I'm here today with Abraham Magana, who is the Prevention and Intervention Specialist with the Council. As you know, House Bill 4165 directed the Council to produce a report on prioritizations of funding for prevention and intervention services for gang-involved and gang-affected youth. And so we have done such. We have produced that report. Is under tab number 6 in your notebooks. What we want to do, however, is to quickly take you through that report, because in the process of developing the report, we came across a program that we felt really needed to be highlighted. It's a community-based, trauma-informed, hospital-based program that works with youth to prevent violence and to prevent the recidivation of violence. And so those individuals are here with us today. Dr. Alicia Norland and her colleagues are here to present that particular program to you this afternoon. But also in the room is Dr. Ted Corbett. And Dr. Ted Corbett. And he is board certified in emergency medicine and an associate professor at Drexel University. And so he is part of the board of directors and the medical director for the Healing Hurt People program in Philadelphia. And so he has been here consulting with the Portland-based program and happened to be here today, so we definitely wanted to introduce him and his colleagues as well. The program itself is one that we think in our search for evidence-based projects and programs is one that we think you'll be very, very interested in hearing. But what we'll do first is run quickly through the report. Abraham will sort of give you some of the highlights of the report. We'll give you our recommendations, and then we'll scoot away and let Dr. Moreland and her team take over. So, Abraham, okay.
Gang activity continues to manifest itself in urban and rural locations throughout the state of Oregon. Gangs are a serious, persistent, and in most areas where they reside, a growing problem. These youth may have had multiple convictions and are at high risk of reoffending, attend middle school or beyond, have a history of multiple suspensions, expulsions, or truancy, have been affected by violence as perpetrator, victim, or associate, and are at risk of retaliation. These youth often have experienced trauma themselves, either inside the home or in their environment. As the YDC was being created, we surveyed all county juvenile directors and tribes to find out how many of them had a significant youth gang problem. From that, the Youth Development Council immediately put federal funding to work in the counties and tribes reporting significant youth gang activity. We have gone back to these entities to get an update on how that money has been able to reduce gang activity and broaden our reach to include more areas affected by gang activity. You will see that update in this report. We have also come up with a set of recommendations that are outlined on page 15 of the report. These recommendations are the following. Prioritize and make funding available that directly seeks to prevent and reduce the number of gang-affected and gang-involved youth in Oregon. Require community entities to engage and form collaborative partnerships. Require collaborative partnership composition to include local government entities, including tribal governments and nonprofits or NGOs that have experience administering effective criminal prevention and intervention programs. Require implementation of evidence-based, research-based, and practice-based approaches. Require utilization of the OJJDP comprehensive gang model strategies. Make targeted, focused investments in identified communities, and require the completion of a YDC Youth and Gangs request for application form.
So these are the recommendations that we're making based on the prioritization of the funding that we have. We will take these recommendations to an interim subcommittee in January as well, because we're having to do a very comprehensive set of recommendations to an interim committee around all of the funding with respect to the Youth Development Council. So you have the report, and we're kind of moving quickly through that and the recommendations because we do want to make sure that Dr. Moreland and her team have enough time to present. But you have the report in your notebooks, and if you have any questions, we can take those now, and or you can make sure you get those questions back to us, and then we will be putting and compiling this report, putting it together for the legislators as well. So if there are any questions at this point, you might want to hear the presentation and then one from me. Without further ado, then Dr. Moreland.
I just want to thank you, Iris, for, I mean, you've done a really an amazing job launching the council and our new division. I remember meeting with, probably 2 years ago, with some members, quite a few community members who've been victims of gang violence and folks who were struggling with this issue. And we made it a priority in 2012 and got the bill passed and got $1 million appropriated. So thank you very, very much for your leadership.
Thank you all for having us today, Governor, and all the members of the Oregon Educational Investment Board. There are a few other people that I wanted to acknowledge. We acknowledge Dr. Ted Cloven, who is a board-certified emergency room physician. We were so lucky to have him here today, and he brought with him Linda Rich, if you would stand. There you are. Hi. And then there's also Dr. Darren Walker, who is the Chief Executive Officer and President of Cascadia Behavioral Health Inc., who's also joining us today. So let me just sort of go down the panel quickly, say who we are, and then we'll get right to the presentation because I know that time is of the essence. But we're hoping to capture all of your time, Governor, to make sure that we can have a rich discussion and engage with you a little bit about what we're doing. So we have to my right and to your left, Josh Lathan, who's our peer intervention specialist, which is a very important peer model that we employ with this program. I am Dr. Alicia Moreland-Cahuilla. And then to my left, I have Dr. Maggie Billington-Davis, who is a board-certified psychiatrist and also happens to be the Chief Medical and Operating Officer at Cascadia Behavioral Inc. Directly to her left is Dr. Lori Morgan, who is a woman of many talents, but has an MD, MBA, and happens to be a board-certified trauma surgeon, but currently serves as the Vice President of Legacy Health and also as the Chief Administrative Officer at Legacy New York. Then we have to her immediate left, Cheryl Johnson, who is the manager of our Healing Her People program. She has a master's in education and is a qualified mental health associate, and you'll understand why that's important to let you know. And then, of course, immediately to her left is our very distinguished guest, Dr. Ted Courtney from Philadelphia. So that is a mouthful, but hopefully you can remember all that and try to sit in order for you. So let's get started. The outline today, we want to talk a little bit about violence as health concern. We want to talk to you a little bit about Healing Her People as a national public health model and the approach to addressing violence sort of in a different, I've heard the word innovative several times, about 12 times today, and I've been sitting here about an hour and a half, so we're going to use it again 4 more times in our talk. The other thing we're going to talk to you a little bit about today is trauma-informed care. What does it mean? We have the expert here with us, Dr. Maggie Bennington Davis. We're also going to talk about Healing Her People as an opportunity to increase employability among opportunity youth and also to increase access to education. Also, we'll talk a little bit about Healing Her People Portland's economic impact and the fact that we actually happen to be leading the triple A's in the era of these accountable care organizations and coordinated care organizations. And then we'll give you some data. We want you to know that we have specific outcome goals, internal and external, and we are actually meeting them. And then some closing thoughts. So just a little bit about the social context of violence, much of which you probably already know. But according to the Centers for Disease Control, homicide accounted for a little over 18,000 deaths in 2006. And then 15 youth per day were killed in the United States in 2005. Homicide is the second leading cause of death in people ages 15 to 24 years of age, and third in ages 25 to 34. And it was the number one cause, homicide, the number one cause of death in African Americans aged 10 to 24, and number 2 amongst Hispanics. So a little bit about this issue of violence as health concerns. About in 1996, the American Academy of Pediatrics had published a report, and it had put out that while it's been routine for several emergency rooms and hospitals to really deal or grapple with the issue of child abuse, suicide attempts, and sexual assault via a multidisciplinary protocol, there really had not been such protocol that existed for young victims of violence, especially young adolescents who had been injured violently. So about 2 years later, the U.S. Department of Justice put out their report, sort of a mandate, and said that most hospitals should have some sort of hospital-based counseling prevention program in communities in particular that are struggling with gang violence. So hence sort of the development of Healing Her People. As you have heard here today, we actually are the 23rd program. This is a national model. There are several programs in Philadelphia, Oakland, and other places, but this is the first here in Portland, Oregon. And so I just want to tell you a little bit about what Healing Her People is. It's a trauma-informed, community-focused, hospital-based violence intervention program. And I want to just pause for a moment here and say to you, the word hospital-based is sort of a misnomer. Hospital-based is really the point of intervention. That's where we get to do some of our most important work, but the bulk of the work and the real important essence of the work is done in the community, which is, I know, where we want to see things happening in the communities and not in hospitals. Okay, so it's designed to do a few things. It's designed to reduce repeat emergency room visits. We want to reduce re-injury, reduce retaliation, and to reduce the potential for the development of post-traumatic stress disorder. And really the goal is to promote healing, not just physical, but also emotional healing among individual males of color, specifically between the ages of 10 and 25, that have suffered from a penetrating trauma. And what I mean by penetrating trauma is someone who's either been stabbed or shot in this particular case. We are, the Healing Her People is a part of what's called the National Network of Hospital-Based Violence Intervention Programs. That is an important point to make because this is a research entity, a body that collects data. It's also another external source of sort of accountability for us to make sure that we are specifically looking at outcomes and looking at ways, more effective ways to sort of measure those outcomes. So what does Healing Her People seek to do? We really seek to shift the way healthcare addresses the needs of young victims of violence. There has traditionally been this model of sort of a criminal-based approach, And we all know what that means, sort of you're guilty, you deserve what you got. But we really want to shift that focus, again, being trauma-informed from more of a criminal-based approach to what we consider to be a public health focus. And that really involves wrapping services around people and viewing them and treating them through sort of a multidisciplinary focus with a psychoeducational base. So we talked a little bit about these hospital-based violence intervention programs, which Healing Hurt People is a hospital-based violence intervention program that we'll be explaining this moment. There are several successful models across the country we've talked about. Philadelphia being one, Oakland, Milwaukee, San Francisco, Boston. But the real running conviction of these programs that I think is real key, and I want you all to really hear about today, is really this simple point that we believe that violence is preventable and emergency rooms have a unique opportunity for what we do, a teachable golden moment and a meaningful intervention. So the fidelity of the Healing Hurt People model is really defined by three principles. There's the goal model engagement, in-hospital engagement, and post-discharge follow-up. And I'm going to go through these three with you briefly. You have them in your notes, but I just want to touch on a few key points. So this golden teachable moment is really the instance where injured victims are really most poised and ripe for change. It's really what we consider to be sort of, you all are probably aware of stroke victims. Stroke victims, when you have a stroke, there's a 3-hour window that you can get a specific treatment. Well, this is very much the same as sort of trauma. And the new trauma literature suggests that there was a specific window for intervention. And if you intervene within that specific window, in our case it's a 4-hour window, that we may be able to get ahead of the curve of future violence. And so this golden teachable moment is our opportunity to do exactly that in a trauma-informed way, to deal with people, to facilitate, not force, but facilitate for them to think about doing something different, to move toward this process of healing. And we also employ a model, a motivational interview model. We can talk a little bit more about that when we have time, but I'm going to continue to move for the sake of time. So then we have in-hospital engagement, which is the second piece. We talked about the second sort of portion of the fidelity of this model. And this is really the opportunity that we have. We have our peer intervention specialist, and we have our case manager. They're able to build rapport through, again, a trauma-informed lens, and I keep underlining it because we're going to get more specific about what trauma-informed is, and I don't want to steal Dr. Maggie Davis's thunder here. But it really does reduce the likelihood of retaliation, and there's a two-pronged approach that we take. So we have the peer model, where our peer intervention specialist, someone with lived experience, is engaging the young victim of violence in a very gentle and appropriate way, while our case manager is engaging the families and the loved ones in the midst of trauma. And again, Ms. Cheryl is a master's prepared clinician, and she does understand how to work with people and families and systems. Then we have our post-discharge follow-up, which is 6 months to a year. And this is really where a real good portion of the work happens. You have intensive case management, navigation of resources with not only victims of violence, but also their families. And that's for up to 6 months to a year. We're using evidence-based curriculum, which is the CEL curriculum developed by Dr. Sandy Bloom back in Philadelphia. We're providing resources for housing, access to health insurance, vocational training, GED completion, and more. And then after the 6 to 12-month period, depending on the depth and the width and the height of the need, we give a warm handoff to our community partners. So again, the running conviction, what all the other 22 programs across the country have been able to powerfully demonstrate is their ability to do these 4 things. We talk about reduce repeat hospital visits, reduce retaliation, reduce re-injury, and to reduce arrest. So let me just talk to you a little bit about why we should intervene at the level of hospital. Some of the data suggests that 44% of young people hospitalized for violence return with another violent injury within 5 years. That's ridiculous. Yes, somebody said wow over there, that's right. And then 20% of them eventually die by violence. That's just absurd. So there's some literature. Again, I said that we're part of the National Network of Hospital-Based Violence Intervention Programs. A lot of these other 22 programs have done studies and have put out research, and so I'm going to go through about 5 studies that have been done by some of our partners across the country. One is Becker Calhoun et al. 2004. Basically, he was looking at arrest rates prior to an intervention period. If you look at the graph table to your figure 10, if you look at figure 10 up on the screen, you'll see that basically in this study they took violently injured youth and non-violently injured youth, They matched them for age, sex, gender, and also whether or not they had any offense or violence-related offenses. As you can see, figure 10 shows that they matched them fairly nicely. The treatment group is the group that was placed in a healing hurt people type model that we had. And the control group were those who were not placed in any such with no intervention. And 6 months later, you'll see figure 11 shows the results, which are overwhelming. Those individuals who were involved in the healing hurt people type program, the rate of any offense was significantly reduced to almost 5%, and versus the control, which was 16%. And then for the violence-related offenses, almost 0 compared to 6%. So significant. So about 98% of the clients were able to remain injury-free who were in a healing hurt people type program, and participants were 70% less likely to be arrested within 6 months of the injury compared to their peers. Another study that was done by Meltzer Lane et al. In 2001, the Milwaukee study. It was done for Project EJIMA, Milwaukee Emergency Department. They had 200 patients aged 10 to 18. Now, you all are early learning folks, and we're teaching people math, so if we had a 3% return post 1 year after hospital-based violence prevention program involvement, how many people did not show back up to the hospital? That's a question. Somebody said a whole bunch. So 3% of 200 is what, 6? So that means 194. Oh, you got the answer, I saw you. Good for you. So that
It's an
means
easy math problem.
Okay, that's great, because we asked our kids to do it, right? So that means 194 of these young people did not show back up to the hospital. There was no control group, but the number is significant, okay? So let's move to the next study. We have the Chicago study that was done in the Chicago Emergency Department, 12-month evaluation. And they were basically looking at the reduction in re-injury rates. And as you can see, just basically the treatment group, 8.1% versus the control group, 20.3%. So we can see that the treatment group who was involved in the Healing Hurt People type program that I've described were able to, we were able to see significant reduction in their re-injury rate. So it's showing that it works. These programs, they work. They have been working, they do work, they will work, and they are working for you. So here's my last study. This was a large study that was done with repeat victims of violence, Baltimore VIP. And it's Dr. Carmel Cooper, who is a trauma surgeon, who was trained by a trauma surgeon at Legacy Emmanuel Hospital. Anyhow, he's done this study. It's a large concurrent case control study that was published in the Archives of Surgery in 2000, and there's the reference if you all want to check it out for yourselves. But here's sort of the main hitting points of this. So this hospital-based intervention programs, they do work. They were looking at ages greater than 18. The treatment or intervention group were violently injured youth. Of course, the control group was non-intervention, sort of non-violently injured youth matched for age and gender. There was some previous hospitalization, blind randomization, and a 3-year follow-up, which is pretty cool. And here's what they found. It's real simple. That hospital-based interventions do work, and that patients who were not involved in an intervention were significantly more likely to be arrested for a violent crime, convicted of a violent crime, involving repeat criminal activity. So HHP is data-driven. We didn't just sort of make up our criteria and come up with something just out of the air. We wanted to have data to sort of lead us and guide us in our efforts. And so Legacy is really our key partner in preventing youth violence. And here's why. Legacy Emmanuel, as you know, is one of our level 1 trauma centers, as well as OHSU, but they know how to do trauma. I really just want you to take a glimpse at the picture and look at the numbers. They see a lot of trauma. They know what they're doing. So if we look at the 2011 data, some of the patient demographics, 22% of the patients were between the age of 10 and 25, 60% were male, 60% were African American, and 40% were Hispanic Latino. Now, if we break that data down a little further, we look at mechanism of injury. In particular, we said that we were concerned with penetrating traumas. And we look at blunt traumas and versus penetrating traumas, there's about 185 in 2011. And if we break that data further down, we see that there's about 109 stabbings and 76 injuries with firearms. Then we look at the length of stay data, because, and this really marks for us, the reason we wanted to look at length of stay in particular is because for us, it gives us the opportunity with our peer intervention specialist, Josh and Ms. Cheryl, to do some of the real work with the families while they're in the hospital, while we're able to capture their attention in a very powerful way. So these are injury scores, and the mildest, at the mildest injury, the length of stay, average length of stay is 2.6 days. And so even if we're looking at the mildest, and we're not really dealing with severe, that gives us 3 days to really sort of engage with the family, engage with the young person, to get them positioned for us to help them in a very powerful way out in the community. This is the youth gang-related violence in Portland, Oregon. This is data that I obtained from Lieutenant Nakamura, who actually is also the review lieutenant. Thank you. He sits on our advisory council. He's with the Portland Gang Task Force, and we are very lucky to have him as a part of our advisory council. But this is some of the data that he gave to me from May to October. There were, just in Portland, related to gangs, 8 stabbings, 24 shootings, and 2 homicides. That's just a small snapshot, so that I wanted to bring you up to date real time. Again, absurd in my purview. Then just a little bit about our model. I'm not going to go through specifically, I'm just going to kind of give you, this is sort of, we thought about, again, we want to do things in decency and order. We believe that to get outcomes, you do have to have a clear vision. You also have to have some order and structure. And this is indeed our structure. Legacy is our best partner. We work with our staff works 24/7. Basically how it works is we get a call from the chaplains and the social workers at Legacy and Manual right when someone just comes into the door. Our staff responds within 30 minutes of the call. So we're within this 4-hour window. They're there, they're engaging the families and the young people. Both of our staff have been trained with Legacy and Manual staff, so there's no HIPAA violations because they have contractor badges with Legacy. They've done the same training that the Legacy staff do. And we work basically through this system. So it doesn't matter what time, we're going running. If you were able to see the Oregonian story about 6 months ago when we launched, Josh was at the front cover and he said he's like Superman. He's ready to put his cape on anytime, ready to go, and that has really been our motto. So we get there, we engage these families, and Cheryl kind of shared with you a little bit about some of our results, but as you can see, it sort of outlines for you sort of our in-hospital piece and then our post-discharge follow-up, just sort of in a more visual way for you. So now with that, that was a lot. I think I got through it in under 10 minutes, 30 seconds a slide, but I'm going to get to Dr. Maggie Bennington-Davis, who's going to talk to you about what it means to be strong and informed.
Thank you, Alicia. Premier Kitzhaber, Madam Chair, board members, it's kind of thrilling to be able to address you. I first met you, Governor Kitzhaber, when I was in medical school when you were authoring the Oregon Health Plan many years ago. And I'm really grateful that you are.
You went on to have a career, right?
I am grateful that you are leading Oregon and therefore the nation in health transformation. It's really a privilege to be able to now give your committee and you some recommendations with regard to healing hurt people. I'm really proud that Cascadia hosted and our CEO, Dr. Darrell Walker, hosted this whole idea, spawned the idea of healing hurt people after meeting Dr. Ted Corbin and Dr. John Rich and Dr. Sandra Bloom in Philadelphia. And I really appreciate Dr. Moreland for her incredible leadership in developing this program, and really proud of the partnership between Cascadia and Legacy. I'm also happy that Carol Rosen gave us a little bit of seed money to launch this project last spring. So it's a really great example of what the power of collaboration. I'm going to do just 3 really quick slides to try to define for you what trauma-informed care is, because it's so central to the idea of healing hurt people. And I wanted to start with the definition of trauma, because since we've been working with trauma surgeons and trauma ER docs, we realized we really had to define our terms. And I like this definition that basically says trauma occurs, the experience of trauma is subjective. It occurs when both internal and external resources of the person are overwhelmed, such that the person feels like their life is in danger. And obviously that it makes a difference whether you're 2 years old or 10 years old or 50 years old. It depends on what experience you've already been through. It depends on the collection of people, supportive others around you. So let's kind of work with that definition of trauma. And as we know from the 1998 study that Dr. Spalletti and Anna did called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, which showed that the exposure to trauma and violence in childhood basically predicted chronic medical conditions, health risk behaviors, early death, and so on and so forth. And really places around the country are exploding with ideas on how to use that information and those data. But what it taught us was that the experience of trauma and violence affects the very architecture of the brain as well as the rest of our body. and it fundamentally changes the experience of the world that person goes on to have. And so that knowledge is at the centerpiece of trauma-informed care. Certainly people that we serve in Medicaid or who are uninsured have a higher prevalence of exposure to trauma and violence, even than Felicity and Amanda showed in their upper white middle class study in 1998. And we know now that exposure to adverse childhood experiences basically are a social determinant of health, and they are the main social determinant of health. And so in short, trauma-informed care means changing the basic question away from what's wrong with this person over to what has happened to this person, such that they have this constellation of perspective on the world as well as the experience that they have. And certainly that's true for our Healing Hurt People program. And seeing people through the lens of understanding the biological, psychological, and social effects of that early exposure to trauma and violence is a hallmark of what Josh and Cheryl bring to their work. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, Governor, Madam Chair. Thank you for the opportunity. As introduced, I'm Lauren Morgan, the Chief Administrative Officer at Legacy Emmanuel, and happy to have been a trauma surgeon in my previous life. Here's just a little bit of data. They kind of gave me the money slides when we start to talk about the triple aim. So these are our patients just in ages 13 to 35 over the last 8 years with penetrating injury by year, divided between those who are Caucasian as well as those who are non-Caucasian. A typical payer mix for penetrating trauma patients here, the vast majority of them do not have insurance. About half of them, and I didn't put all 8 years here for you, but it really is between 45 and 50%. And comparatively at Emmanuel, our overall population is about 12% self-pay patients. So they tend to financially be very unsupported patients. There is no margin in taking care of penetrating trauma patients. It's always a net loss in terms of the medical care. It's just a question of how deep the loss is. Now, I would say that that's with and the numbers for all these in 2013, obviously it's an incomplete year, so it's not that we had a great year in 2013. As a matter of fact, I think if Lieutenant Nakamura would tell you we're not having a great year at all in Portland in 2013. That's with my administrator hat. Extremely, it's expensive care that is not well supported and certainly is a loss. But what you don't see on this slide is certainly the loss of productivity. These are all very young people who would have many, many years to contribute to the economy, and that often becomes completely lost. And then the other piece is the human capital and what it means not only for these patients, but for their families, for their younger brothers and sisters. When we look at trauma as a trauma team, this is a family affair. And I guarantee you that if you're looking at a patient that's in that bar in 2012, their older brother's probably in the bar in 2007, and quite frankly, if we went back that far, their father's probably in 1972. And so I think it's really important to understand that part of this cycle, breaking the cycle of this trauma care that Maggie spoke about is really what Healing Hurt People is all about.
Greetings, Governor, Madam Chair. We're really excited to talk about our program, to share with you about our program today. So far, you've seen the HHP model, why it works, how it works. You've seen data from Milwaukee, Chicago, and Baltimore. Now we'd like to shift our focus to some of the data from our local site, Healing Hurt People Portland. Healing Hurt People Portland was launched June 7, 2013. And just 2 short days later, we enrolled our very first client. And from that date until now, 5 months later, the big question is, are we meeting our intended targets?
So when you look at this slide, it kind of gives you a little clue. It says, yes, yes, we are. But when we get to the end of the data slides, we'll just give you some more specific information exactly about how we're doing with repeat hospitalization, retaliation, re-injuring, re-arrest, and arrest. So, now this graph offers a look at the number of clients we screened each month since June 7th. What you'll notice in the month of September is there was a significant increase in the number of referrals. Now, while we thought we might see an increase during the summer months when school was out, that didn't happen. But immediately after school resumed, we saw this increase. Here we get a closer look at the ages of the young men referred to our program. As was mentioned before, our group, we serve young people aged 10 to 25. The majority of young men were between the ages of 16 and 19, and the others, roughly 30%, were between the ages of 20 and 19, 20 and 29. While 85% of our referrals have been African American, we have enrolled individuals of Hispanic, Latino, and Asian descent. Now this graph clearly shows that the majority of clients that were referred to our program presented in the ED with gunshot injuries, and 15% presented with stabbing injuries. Dr. Bennington Davis talked a little bit earlier about the ACEs study and the direct link between childhood trauma and chronic diseases. And there is that direct link between childhood trauma and social and emotional problems like the ones we deal with: depression, violence, being a victim of violence, and suicide. So the higher the ACE score, the higher the risk of health and social problems. And with an ACE score of 4 or more, things start to really get serious, and the likelihood of these problems increases significantly. Our clients that completed the ACE questionnaire scored between 4 and 6. So you've heard a little bit about the golden moment and the in-hospital engagement. So let me just share with you what we do here in Portland. So once we get a referral, Josh, the peer intervention specialist, arrives at the hospital within 30 minutes. Sometimes we're able to meet with the clients, and sometimes that's not possible because the client is either in surgery, sedated, or intubated. In those cases, we interact with the families. We describe our program and the services we provide. And this is especially important with clients who are under 18 because it's the parents that will have to give consent for participation. We tell them about trauma. We educate them about the trauma symptoms that they can expect to see in the young men. Things such as wanting revenge, feeling sad, ashamed, or just being jumpy and restless. And as soon as possible, we complete a safety assessment. Now this really gets to the heart of retaliation. Sometimes the client is quite aware of the individual or individuals that caused the injury. And while they may not have any immediate plans to retaliate themselves personally, sometimes the case of family members and relatives or friends, they're interested in doing this. And this is why the engagement with the family and not just the client is important. It's really looking at who has influence in this family and who can we speak to be a peace broker. And this was certainly the case with the very first client that we enrolled. We are talking about a young man that had no direct gang ties himself, but was from a family with a gang legacy. His father was deceased, was a gang member, killed as a result of gang violence, and he has several half-brothers that are also gang members. This young man was a college graduate, duly employed, and was doing quite well. He happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and with a last name that carried some baggage. It was this young man's mother that was very vocal and very passionate with her brothers about not retaliating. When clients are in the hospital over several days, we complete a trauma history questionnaire, we conduct depression screening, and we complete the ACE questionnaire that you heard a little bit about before. But most important, with every contact, we are focused on building trust. And our goal is to establish the type of rapport with that client that will make them comfortable and easy to engage with us after they've been discharged. And how do we achieve this? We achieve this by offering bedside support to the client and by assisting the family in any way that we can. Any way that we can. And that may mean advocating with hospital staff around a specific request. It may mean following up with the detectives to see how soon the client will get their cell phone returned. It also means offering gift cards for meals to moms who've been at the bedside constantly and unable to prepare meals for herself. So the client is discharged from the hospital, and what you see here is that clients are eligible to be in the program 6 to 12 months, just depending on the level of need, and below is just the suggested minimum level of contact. I can tell you for certain that our clients receive a lot more contact, but this is the minimum level that they can expect. And one other thing that I want to add is that we also use text messaging. And while it does not replace telephone contact or actual in-person visit, it's been a real effective tool to share information on the go and to get a quick response to questions. We've got some Blazer tickets. Anybody want to go to the game? Our clients are comfortable in communicating with us this way, and because we can and we do, they think we're pretty cool. So what you're seeing now are the actual services that we have provided to our clients. And before I call out those, the services that you see are based on a specific treatment plan. But before I call out those, I want to tell you some of the things that every client gets. Any client that is enrolled into our program, they all can expect to receive a behavioral health assessment. Now, one thing I want to say about that, this is done wherever it makes sense to have it completed by the client, whether it's in the community, at home, over a meal, or at the Garlington Center where we provide services. The behavioral health assessment is an important step in the mental and emotional healing. They receive a formal diagnosis, and it's this diagnosis and a prescribed treatment plan that really drives the type of care and services the client receives. It helps the client to understand his behavior and often complex trauma history. And it's this type of insight that's really important in connecting the dots and being able to make different choices moving forward. Incorporated into all of the treatment plans are peer mentoring, engagement in pro-social activities, and trauma education. So about these services that we've provided, stable housing is a huge need in our community. We've enrolled families into Rentwell tenant education programs where they have an opportunity to address any barriers that they have to obtaining a rental agreement. We've also connected them to programs that provide short-term rental assistance. The young man that we spoke of earlier, he's interested in attending law school. We've been able to connect him to a second-year law student who has agreed to provide mentoring to him. We've also given him an early Christmas present of LSAT study materials. Our peer intervention specialist, Joshua down at the end, he regularly engages clients in pro-social activities. Not only does he provide outlets for safe outlets for our clients, these efforts have helped to strengthen the relationships. We help clients navigate community services such as Oregon WorkSource for employment and training opportunities. So as you can see, these services are interrelated. Housing, education, employment, healthcare, we address all of these and often simultaneously. So we have opportunities for education and economic upward mobility through partnerships. We are partnering with a program called Construction Hope. It's a construction company, and it provides pre-apprenticeship programs that offer employment opportunities to interested and eligible clients. Legacy Emmanuel, just a fabulous partnership. HHP collaborates with the trauma nurses Talk and Tug. Now here's where we provide that trauma education. Not only do we provide it to our clients, we take this piece to the community. We've presented at alternative schools. So it's not just young men, the population that we serve, that receive this information. It's also young women. Healing Hurt People also collaborates with Legacy in providing insurance. Any of our clients that are uninsured we are able to refer to Legacy to register for Cover Oregon, and we're really excited about that. Gang Impacted Family Team, also known as GIFT. GIFT is a part of our HHP Advisory Council as well, and are well aware of what our program's inclusion criteria is. Therefore, when they know that there's been an incident involving a young man eligible for our program, they reach out to us, letting us know, a young man is on his way, did you get a call? Just be on the lookout, you will be getting a call. And also after the fact, after an incident has occurred and they've called to make sure that that person didn't fall through the cracks. And a good example of this is that sometimes a young person receives an injury that doesn't require hospitalization, so by the time Josh gets there, they're already gone. GIFT will call us and give us information to help us to connect with that young man later. So, the answers to the question. How are we doing with our intended outcomes so far? So let's just take a look. For clients that have been enrolled in the program greater than 4 months, repeat hospitalizations, 0. Retaliation, 0. Rearrest, 0. Re-injury, 0. For clients that have been enrolled in the program 2 months or less, again, repeat hospitalization, 0. Retaliation, 0. Rearrest, 0. And re-injury, 0. So we think the answer to that question is a resounding yes at this time.
So we really are just going to, we want to leave some time for engagement. Thank you, Ms. Cheryl. And really, we'll summarize in this way and then sort of open it up for questions. So Healing for People Portland is trauma-informed and evidence-based, as you have heard. It reduces repeat emergency room visits, reduces re-injury, lowers overall health care costs, increases economic opportunity and employability for opportunity youth, and increases access to education for opportunity youth. So with that, we're going to say thank you so much for entertaining us today, and we hope to entertain your questions at this time. And this is just a copy of, just so you can see, it's not in your packet, but this is our advisory council that represents a number of partnerships. So we have a lot of people at the table, so we're not duplicating effort. Everyone in Portland who's doing youth violence prevention is at our table, because we all do something different. And so we're working together to make sure that we optimize our ability to do the most good and putting a dent in this youth violence issue. Thank you.
Questions or comments? And Governor, I know you have to leave shortly, so if you would like to
I
go
guess I have a
first.
comment. This is great.
Yeah.
I think everybody picked this up. What strikes me about this is that you've recognized, not just recognized, but you've actually acted on the fact that gang violence is not really a criminal justice issue. It's an education issue, it's an employment issue, it's a lack of opportunity issue, it's a lack of hope issue. And I'm struck by the parallels between the formal medical system. The number one admission diagnosis for people on Medicare is congestive heart failure. And 40% of those people return within 6 months with congestive heart failure, which has nothing to do with how we treat the acute episode. It has everything to do with not having a post-acute system that actually addresses compliance. And this is a beautiful parallel. I guess my question is, so how do we sustain and expand this? How do we really take this to scale? And both organizationally and from the standpoint of cost, because if we were to be able to do a full cost accounting of these young people, your program downstream saves untold millions of dollars, not to mention human potential.
Well, Alicia has asked me to take a crack at this, and I imagine everybody at our table here has their own different view of that particular elephant. A lot of what Oregon's health transformation is speaking about, namely integration, behavioral health. I'm a believer that all health is behavioral. So the idea that we're integrating is a little bit redundant, but that will help us a lot, bringing these systems together, the physical healthcare system and the mental healthcare system and the addiction system. They all really need to be working hand in hand, but even broader. And as Alicia's advisory council member list demonstrates, these are partnerships that go way outside of traditional healthcare.
Yep.
And so, I think we've already got the answer. How do we build on this? How do we scale it up? And we're ready to do that. The issue is, and I hate to be mundane, but in fact, that's where we all wind up, isn't it? And that is, how can we make this sustainable financially?
Right.
And although, we're talking about integration and so forth, currently, we're, at least here in Portland, we do not have an integrated payment system. So it is a real challenge to figure out how in our existing system do we capitalize on the gains, not only in human capital and in jobs lost and so on and so forth, but in actually dollars saved from the healthcare system, which in fact is going to benefit from this. But, I think at some point really soon, we're going to need to figure out how we can find programs like Healing Hurt People and make sure we're supporting them in their infancy like this and not getting in our own way by continuing our siloed systems of payment. So I'm sorry to be so blunt, but in fact that's Mark, you want to add?
Well, I was going to say, in fact, Maggie is being very politic, and the surgeon in me is not able to do that. So I will just say the honest answer is more money. We have 2 level 1 trauma centers in the city of Portland. The majority of these patients historically have come to manual, but not all the patients come to manual. And we do have a whole population of patients that we know goes to OHSU, and it breaks our heart that we're not able to serve those patients. The fidelity of the program is really based on that golden moment. So we really need to get in there and get at the patients. And while Josh is wonderful and he truly has a cake, he really can't be in 2 places at once. And as you can imagine, that working 24/7 becomes a question of how sustainable is it? How long can you do it before? When do you need relief? And so really the short answer to your question is, how do we expand this? We need more investment, and we need more people, because it's obviously it's a very intensive program that requires a lot of effort. That's very focused around actually not a terribly large number of patients at any one time. However, it really is that investment, that small investment today for that huge payback over the next 60 years.
Other questions?
Yes.
Dick.
I really appreciate what you're doing. I mean, I'm not naive in this, but it seems like you're a MASH unit, and there's dollars spent to put you out of business. I mean, you need to be out of business because of the crime activity. You need to do that by the newborn today not visiting you in the trauma area. Has overall crime gone down in the area that you serve?
Lieutenant, would you like to go into that? And actually, let me just sort of remind you, refresh your memory. We just started June 7th. This intervention just started June 7th.
The point I'm making is, I mean, yes, you need more funding to do what you're doing, of course, but we're putting our hand into the dike and stuff,
and I think the point that you're making is really a question. It's the distinction between intervention and prevention. And I think that there are some instances where you have to intervene to prevent. Now, I agree with you that it would be nice to never see them in the trauma unit, but the harsh reality is that they're there. So the question becomes, when they get there, how do we make sure they don't come back? And that's sort of where we are. So your largest question about the prevention, I have Lieutenant Mark.
But we're an investment board here, and where are we going to invest money? We obviously have to take care of what you're exactly about and doing the trauma. But still, we're an investment of dollars, and so we have bookends here. We have you at one end, and we have a newborn at the other end. And we need to address the problem to release your costs and what you're doing.
Before you answer, could I just ask those people on the phone to mute your phone? We're getting some feedback or paper shuffling on this end. Thank you.
I just want to very quickly comment, Madam Chair and board members. Philadelphia just completed a Robert Woods Johnson funded study where they mapped their city based on the ACEs, on the adverse childhood experiences. And from my point of view, that's the first step in what you're talking about. First, we have to understand what are we exposing our next generation to, in what communities, and then we can start building very specifically the targeted prevention services for each community, each neighborhood. And I think that would begin to get at what you're talking about. So if you're curious about that study, it's posted on a website called the Institute for Safe Families, allruntogether.org.
In regard to the increase or decrease in gang violence, this year, overall number of incidents is lower, but we're seeing about double the people being injured, double the number of shooting victims, double the number of stabbing victims. So since May to now, we've seen a significant increase in gang violence in the city of Portland.
Thank you. Nicole?
I just think it's important to add some historical context. I really appreciate that piece, but I think you all, and thank you for your presentation, it's really excellent. I also think it's important to keep in mind the change in how gang intervention and prevention services have taken place in the last 6 years. If you look back 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, you actually saw a complete reorganization in the way that Multnomah County administered its gang prevention funds, and the city of Portland took money away from youth prevention in earlier years and went more to sort of intervention and police and parole intervention. And Multnomah County reinvested dollars away from prevention with younger kids and began to invest dollars in direct intervention once a young person was gang involved. And I'm saying this not necessarily for the benefit of our presenters, but for our board, that when we saw a huge spike in violence over the last few years, it was directly because of decisions that folks like us made. And it had a direct negative impact in the uptake of gang violence. And literally we went from 2 years after those policy decisions were made to seeing several hundred more young people be in violent incidents. So I just want to share that because it's a very recent policy occurrence that we've seen in this local community. And so thank you for your presentation. But as policymakers, I think we need to reflect on great best practices and sometimes what happens when policies are made to take money away from prevention.
Mark.
Loved your presentation, loved your passion. It's fantastic to see that. I was struck by how you had such success by narrowing your focus. And I guess I don't know if this is rhetorical or not, but one of our biggest challenges here are the sheer volume of audiences and the needs. And I guess my question is this: do you attribute your success to the fact that you have such a narrowed, laser-like focus on who you're addressing, how you're addressing, and what your outcomes are?
Well, I think that in part, yes. The other piece is that I think that the approach, as we tried to go through to talk to you a little bit about the mechanisms that we've employed, and so the approaches and the frameworks that we're looking for working with these particular population has been just as important. And again, we looked at the data, and the data suggested that this was sort of a high-risk group. And so we went with sort of the top tier in an effort, but of course, I'm bold enough to say and to believe that even if we were to widen our focus, which we are hoping to be able to do with more resources, that we could demonstrate similar outcomes, because programs across the country like Dr. Ted Corbin's program in Philadelphia have been able to demonstrate that. Chicago has been able to demonstrate that. So that's what we're doing.
Hannah.
You were fast. But I appreciate that, but I also want to say that this is really important information, and I appreciate the fact that you're talking about the realities that we have. And you mentioned that it's not a whole lot of patients that you're seeing, but the impact that has on all of our students, they don't feel safe. And it's not okay that we have students that don't feel safe. in our schools and our communities. So when you ask about how do we fund it, we prioritize. It's important. What's important to you, you prioritize. And as we listen to all of the things that we listen to, yes, standardized test scores are important, but being safe and building the relationships, you have a great gift to be able to build relationships with these patients. We need to allow that in our schools all the time. My question is around the connection between our schools and your program, because my eyes are going bad, I can't read that. Do we have any counselors that are involved? Is there a good connection between the K-12 counselors and the program?
We don't have any on our advisory council currently, but we do work with the schools. As you said, as Ms. Cheryl pointed out, that we have the Trauma Nurses Talking Tough team, in addition to our Healing Her People team that are going into alternative schools, and really any school that wants us to come in to really talk about and educate on, trauma, the impact of it, how they feel, assessing for things like reactions to traumatic events, shootings at games, all of that. So we do have that. We are open. We are looking to widen. We have a number of people on the board that have had experiences. Hi. And so we definitely are, that is one place where we would definitely like to expand. So to your point, to bring a school counselor, or we do work with school counselors and the like, but we don't have any on our board currently.
Thank you.
Other questions? Well, again, thank you very much for such an informative presentation. Appreciate the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, there's a request for a very quick break. Is that okay with everyone? Let's take a 5-minute break, bio break, and we'll be right back.
I'm going to try to see if there's any other time. Some of the materials I want to share with you, I don't think they have with me. But if it's not happening,
I'm actually Thursday. I was supposed to go here and I just decided I'm not going. So this morning is really good.
them until morning food.
Actually, like all days.
Oh, really?
What about Friday?
I mean, basically.
I literally can eat anytime on Thursday from like 8 to
Given our size, what would you predict? Some of this is
Totally. Just back to back.
But you see where we have this sort of oversupply.
I would be done at 4:30 and have till 6 tomorrow. Does any of that time work for you?
Kind of, so we know that people are relatively that's not true.
What's your break? I have an 8 to 9 tomorrow or a 5 to 6.
I could do 5 to 5:45.
There's social science, I mean, being so versatile.
Could you go over to my building?
Yeah, at 5 o'clock. I'm going to be Franklin High School, 3 to about 4.
And then
You're near the pearl, right?
this is the one where he says, I didn't see it. I focus on relax. People with degrees were working 35 hours a week. Some of that, I realized, must be because we're getting this huge migration
basically, this isn't just like working
That lady that was turning up. What is someone I've been meaning to send her information. She's
also that people
great. I mean, she worked at SEI for years. She ran all their family services.
That's why
She worked for Legacy for many years, the Urban League.
like retiring college degrees are settling over that's not what you should know that,
We're sorry. Your conference is ending now. Please hang up.
She's not in the
Yeah, and the policy first, so I knew you were probably, hey.
Do you want someone to let Rob know that he's next?
What'd you say?
Rob's off the phone and back in the hallway. Do you want me to let him know he's next, or?
Yeah, or Ben can go, and then he can go.
All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, but you can.
I'll let him know like 5 minutes.
Yeah, yeah. Water would be great. So this person.
Yeah.
So you're thinking for Ben.
Yeah, she's really one of our employees.
And the voice of our actors.
Okay, good. And I want to share that list with you. Why don't we do this? If I can't get to you tomorrow, I'll call you. Hi.
Just recently now.
Great law. Yes, it was. So
Thanks for your help. Remember your name. Yeah. Yeah, she's up here. No, her, it's a little confusing because Joe Holiday, who's one of the vice chancellors, is here at her place. She's the interim chancellor of the university. So she generally participates more. Professor, yeah. Well, thanks for saying hi. Thanks, Deb. How are you? Likewise.
With like 9 to 15-year-olds, and it was like sports programs.
Yeah.
You get ready to start. Let me say my hi, everybody.
Great to see you again.
Yeah, I did.
I mean,
And it was very true.
you really, like, if you do this, you're going to see so many more students.
Well, that was just, well, it was interesting. The Western.
Yeah. I forgot you could.
No, I was here. You said it. Right. But I lived it, so I know. Anyway.
We're never going to get it. No, we shouldn't have this issue with having
politically expedient at the time.
Yeah, but we were, they're not,
We were just reminiscing. I was talking about how we lived through any organization.
Just because we didn't start? Yeah.
we're on the other side. There is one. Is everybody off? Okay.
I didn't get any water.
It doesn't matter, I know.
It's like bladder infection.
Okay, amazingly, we're still ahead of schedule. Doesn't seem that way, but we are.
It's a war of attrition.
So we're going to move on to back to our agency updates, and Ben, Higher Education Coordinating Commission.
Thank you, Chair. So As has been suggested about the OEIB, I think from time to time, it's probably useful for me to remind the board and staff and audiences, again, of the kind of purpose of the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, what it is and what it's about. So just to refresh your memories, effective next July 1, 2014, the HAC, the Commission, will become a single entity in the state, along with the OEIB, that's responsible for state support, funding, and coordination of the higher education system in Oregon, including public universities, community colleges, state need-based aid, our private post-secondary sector, our career colleges, and private colleges and universities that we license, regulate, and authorize in certain respects. And so that commission inherits these responsibilities generally effective July 1st, 2014. I have been hired, as you know, to support that commission as its executive director. I'll have a small staff that will be working with me in the execution of those responsibilities. The legislation established reporting lines from the director or commissioner of CCWD, as well as the director of OSAC, to me. So we are really conceiving of this post-secondary work in a real unified way, consistent with the legislature's and governor's intentions. The commission has been appointed, as you're aware. Tim Nesbitt was elected its chair at its October meeting. David Reeves serves on that board, as well as this one, of course. And really, you should understand your relationship with that board, I think, very much as you are coming to understand your relationship with the Early Learning Council. It's a similar kind of conception. It's sort of an arm of the OEIB, if you will, to help extend the work and thinking around higher education and to provide you with advice, for example, around the question that a member raised earlier, I think it was Julia, about how we count that middle 40, what certificates and other degrees, and Gerald spoke to it, count in that middle 40. That's the kind of question that you could turn the Higher Education Coordinating Commission to for advice. Ultimately, I think the responsibility of definitions here would become yours. The commission will meet, the new commission will meet for the second time in November, so this month, next week actually, on November 18th and 19th. It will work on a mission statement that speaks to its purpose to foster and sustain rewarding pathways to opportunity and success in higher education for Oregonians. It will do some initial thinking and planning around kind of 6 major areas of responsibility that it has, some of them effective technically July 1st, but there's a sort of 6-month transition here that we're beginning. One area that's really organized around access, affordability, and student success, and here's where the work of the commission in response to your charge adopted at your meeting a couple of months ago to them to reshape or come up with proposals for reshaping how the state allocates need-based aid for higher education, or the Oregon Opportunity Grant. This is where the commission will work on the proposal the legislature created around a pilot for a pay-it-forward model for funding. This is where the commission will consider possibilities of, for example, an enhanced web portal to allow students to better understand the credits that they've achieved through high school experiences, potential credit for prior learning, workplace-related experiences, and a variety of post-secondary experiences that they may have accumulated, and see those credits and their pathways towards degrees. So that's one of the 2 major topic areas. The second is we're calling sort of institutional resources, capacity, and quality. The HEC will have responsibility for helping UT up the 2015-17 governor's recommended budget for higher education, so it will have a committee that's dealing with that question. The HEC is responsible for allocating resources among the institutions, the community colleges and public universities. So that question of funding formulas, on what basis will institutions be paid, is one that comes ultimately to the HEC, and so there will be initial consideration of that next week. And the final sort of major area of focus for the HEC under that category is program approval. The HEC is the place where a community college or university will come that wants to start a new program or significantly modify a program, and so its responsibility for fashioning a coordinated system will be discussed and some initial thinking done at its meeting next week. But really, all of that is work that is just beginning as this commission gets its legs under it. The final thing I'll say about its upcoming meeting next week, actually on the 19th, the second day of its two-day meeting, it will be taking up the equity lens that you all have promulgated, expected to adopt that. It will be discussing and probably adopting a report to the legislature on opportunities around common course numbering between community colleges and universities, with some recommendations that really get sort of beyond common course numbering, but are consistent with that idea of easing student transfer among the two. And the chair will next week designate liaisons to your subcommittees. So David Reeves plays that role on the best practices, and transition subcommittee will expect that the HEC will have a designee for your equity and partnership and outcome investment and investments subcommittees as well. We'll be hearing from Dr. Golden. Hilda Roselli is helping facilitate portions of the meeting. David Longenecker, who's the president of which he'll also be Western Interstate Compact on Higher Education, will also be participating in the meeting to help support it through facilitation. So we're very much in a sort of gearing up this new commission. Over the next 6 months, I'll also be putting together the staff, that working with Bob's staff at OSAC and Gerald's staff at CCWD, and in transition with and in collaboration with the Chancellor's Office, we'll be sort of putting together the agencies that will be supporting higher education going forward. So that's the update.
Thank you, Ben. Any questions or comments? Hannah?
Yeah, way back when we first started, we talked about shrinking instead of expanding. I guess you're talking about staff that's being hired on, and is that replacement of positions that are being eliminated from some other area, or?
Yeah, so it's a good question. The major shift from a sort of staffing standpoint, and it is a shift, and frankly overall it's likely a fairly significant contraction, is really the reorganization of staff and resources that have historically been held in the Oregon University System's Chancellor's Office. And that office, of course, has been the administrative headquarters of our 7 public universities. 3 of those universities have established their own university boards, or the legislature has established their own boards to govern those. And so some of the significant resources from the Chancellor's Office are being shifted to the campuses, frankly, in conjunction with their new responsibilities to govern themselves. The Chancellor's Office also has been the entity that's performed some of what I've described the HEC as performing, namely program approvals. This is the State Board of Higher Ed, funding decisions, budget development. And so that really is a transfer to the HEC. And so when I describe new positions being created at the HEC, there will be new positions. They will not equal the number of positions or amount of dollars, at least under current budgets. They won't come close to equaling the number of positions or dollars that currently do those functions at the Chancellor's Office, which create, I think, a significant challenge for the HEC. We think there's some significant opportunities, too, in more closely integrating the university oversight and coordination with community college oversight and coordination and financial aid. But in total, fewer administrative resources as a result of contraction of the Chancellor's Office of a significant measure, some small staff at the HEC.
We still have a chancellor.
An interim chancellor.
We will have a chancellor. We still have that position, and now we have an executive director of HEC.
So the law establishes that effective July 1st, 2014, the position of chancellor and the board to which the chancellor reports, the State Board of Higher Ed, is a governing board for the 4 universities, Eastern, Southern, OIT, and Western, that don't have institutional boards of their own. So you can imagine UVA with its institutional board, PSU with its institutional board, OSU with its institutional board, and then a chancellor of a 4 campus institution. This is the default. There are some possibilities for change between now and then, even under current law. But this is, if nothing else happens, this is the model that will be in place. And a chancellor's office, yes, a chancellor, yes, a board, but with significantly fewer responsibilities than they have today, because the shift has been of statewide responsibilities to the HEC. And so the chancellor would be akin to the institutional presidents at U of O, PSU, and OSU. And there's some attraction to that model, though I don't think anyone's settled on that as necessarily the final model, but some attraction insofar as that consortium of 4 would be roughly the same size in terms of student enrollment as U of O, PSU, and OSU each are. So you could understand this to be sort of a parallel construction.
Can I ask Nancy that we get a organizational chart to see, because I'm still not quite understanding how we're doing this and where the resources are going.
I'd be happy to provide that, and it's the organizational chart that this board brought forward to the legislature as its recommendation that was then put into legislation in 2013.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I see that Rob has returned from the Early Learning Council, so right on time, your chance to report.
Thank you. Sorry I missed part of this. I'm doing out of work, and so I wanted to be there for that. So just a quick update. First of all, lots of things underway at the Department of Education. It's a really busy time for us, but a really great time too. I think one of the important pieces of work that we're heavily engaged in right now just is in carrying out of the strategic initiatives. So there's the funds, and we're involved in awarding and working with groups around their responses to the strategic initiatives and making sure that we get dollars in the hands of providers as quickly as possible, but then also making sure that the quality of the work that will be provided is really top-notch. There are a couple different pieces. One, just a thought about how we go about that work, and really there are a couple different kinds of thinking and ways that we're going about this. So I want to use 2 examples. And that is that a lot of work, the majority of it, is intended to be really deep. So my example of that would be the collaboration grants. The collaboration grants really have been in partnership with Chalkboard previously, where Chalkboard took on this sort of collaboration process within school districts that was about educator effectiveness and compensation and a whole bunch of other pieces that sort of fit together with that, and said, here's a really important piece of work. They were a great example of that work, and we saw different outcomes that were achieved in districts that took on the collaboration grants when it came around students. And so we have some dollars to expand those collaboration grants, and Chalkboard is working with us, and the department is working on that. But it's a place where we're trying to go really deep work in specific places where we replicate something that had worked very well previously and start to expand that a little bit across the state. And then a different kind of example would be some of the work that we're doing around the Common Core State Standards and Senate Bill 290, which is a combination of educator effectiveness and educators really looking at how to work in the Common Core, which is something that all teachers or all educators are being impacted by in the K-12 system. And so it's a really different look than trying to do something very deeply in a few places and doing something broadly across the state. And so we've approached those differently with RFPs, where a few awards have been given with significant sums where we're trying to do things in a deep way. And then some other things like our work around Common Core and 290, where we're trying to scale this up across the state for all educators. And so we've been working on the award of dollars around the Common Core and 290 with Chalkboard, OEA, and COSA, and thinking about how to partner there with that, or at least to get some feedback about the process that we're putting together to scale up on that. And this week, as a matter of fact, I believe it's the 14th and 15th in the Grand, we have the first training for a train-the-trainer model around ramping up on the Common Core and educator readiness for 290. And so within that, we're asking leadership teams from every district, and depending on the district size, how many different people are coming, we're asking for, our expectation is that we would do some really deep training on those two pieces, and then those trainers would go back to their districts. And then we would provide funding for all districts to be able to have some dollars for training and for substitutes and so forth, to work with educators in each district and scale that work up. So we're going to be in LeGrand on the 14th and 15th, Portland on the 19th and 20th, and in December on December 3rd and 4th in Eugene, so that we're going out and doing this in different places across the state. And for the teams that support that work, there'll be 5 days of training between now and the end of the school year. One of the biggest challenges for us is that on those two pieces, Common Core and educator effectiveness, everybody's in a different place. Because some school districts have gotten way out in front of that, and some are at the very beginning phases. And so as we do that training, working to differentiate at the very beginning for districts, no matter how they arrive, is a really important piece of that work. So that's just a couple of the strategic initiative pieces that we have going out. We have a calendar of this work that we put out to all school districts so that they know when the different applications and responses to proposals and so forth will be available, as well as all of our education partners. We also are really involved, so that work is a big piece of work for us. Another place where we have a big piece of work is simply in delivering on all the different pieces that came out of the last legislature. So there are about 107 bills out of the last legislature that impact education. That's a pretty hefty number of bills. Just the thought of the different sort of task forces and things like that we need to staff and support, including funding task force, capital improvement and planning task force, high school transition services, accelerated learning, and regional services. Those are all different groups that are out doing work right now, are big pieces, as well as just putting the rules together so that school districts understand what they need to do in response to districts and boards, what they need to do in response to the various legislation that was passed out of the last session is a really interesting bit of work that we have underway, but it's also good work, and I think that it's coming along well. Last, I just want to report that we had a visit from the U.S. Department of Education 2 weeks ago, where they were doing a review of our waiver and just looking at our waiver progress thus far. I think that visit went very, very well. We're well on our way with the waiver. As I think I reported to this group earlier, we've asked for them to review our status when it comes to our evaluation piece around for educators, and because they had us on, I'm trying to remember the name of the
Red alert.
Red alert. Well, I call it double secret probation.
Yeah, double secret probation.
Yeah, that doesn't. I think they've said that we're at high risk of not meeting the waiver. And they've been very responsive in listening to our thoughts about where we sit on that piece. We continue to work with them. I actually am very hopeful that they'll remove that status from the state by the time we're done with this discussion. Certainly they know that, I believe that they know that simply is not the case, that we're in a really good position when it comes to completing that part of the waiver. So those are some of the things that we have underway. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Rob. Any questions? So Mark, and just go down this.
Rob, I think if you could write up a little summary in your newsletter about the waiver and that progress, that would be very meaningful for the districts. People are really curious on where we're standing and what the future means, and your idea of what that was. Second thing is just kind of a comment for Rob and Nancy for this group to think about a little bit. As I watch the rollout of all of the strategic initiatives, when push comes to shove, it ends up basically being implemented the same way. Substitutes, stipends, travel, which is conflicting directly with teachers staying in the classroom teaching kids. And I just want us to maybe have this conversation, or not, obviously not today, but this is going to be my new drum. We have got to look differently at the school calendar. And I know what this means for local control versus centralization, blah, blah. But the reality is there are not enough days, and the same high-quality teachers that we want leading these efforts don't want to be outside of their classroom anymore. And a lot of these districts don't have enough substitutes as is. And it's hurting us in multiple ways. And when you look at applying for any of these initiatives, it's going to come down to the same types of implementation. We've got to look differently at calendar and use of time strategically as a state, rather than the way we are right now. We're going to continue to have hiccups with implementation. And I know that's not an easy one to bite off, but I want to go on the record and say that until we start looking at that, maybe we look at some regional pilots, maybe we do something differently, we cannot get this kind of scale up.
Thank you, and thank you for letting me know that's going to be your new drumbeat. I guess I would also, just on the waiver, be happy to write something up in my newsletter and get that out, or our newsletter. So just, I don't know what level of detail people want, but we're attempting to have really probably, in the state right now, there are two different models of educator evaluation that are going on. One that's called a matrix model, and then there's one that's called a percentage model. I don't want to get into too much detail on either of those, except for to say that the percentage model by USDOE really kind of requires about that 20% of the teachers or educators' evaluation would be based on student outcome test results. And there's a big national debate about that question. We really believe that we have two models that have been developed in the state that USDOE would accept either the percentage model or the matrix model. Our real question to them is, will you accept both? So could we have both in the state or not? And or one or the other. And so that's part of why we are in this high-risk status. I would argue that if we handed them our percentage model today, they would say, that'll work. And if that's the case, then I don't know how we could be at high risk of not being able to meet the conditions of the waiver, because we have it in hand. It just is that we haven't been able to hand it to them been willing to hand it to them that way yet, because we think a broader debate and more research about the outcomes based on those two models is important.
No, go ahead. I want to follow up on that since you just brought up the two models. Rob, is there any research to show that tying standardized test scores to teacher evaluation is an effective measure?
I'm sure that there is some research about that. Whether or not it's completely accurate or not, I don't know the answer to. I haven't seen it.
This has been a huge debate. It's not okay. There's no research to back it up. We talk so much about best practice. We cannot allow anyone to force us to do the wrong thing for our students. It's the wrong thing to do. We have better ways. We've had our educators working side by side with the administrators to build tools that will work for our students. Let's stand strong and make sure that we do the right thing. Don't let them push us around, please.
So mine was just a little question related to your bringing up the matrix and the percentage model, and just wondering if you would, you don't have to answer it now, but as you do the summary, I know that for those of us who have the percentage model, what's enabling us to still work really collaboratively in a productive way with our district teachers is that right now we're just in this sort of piloting, try it out stage. But I'm wondering if we're getting any messages that the 20%, if the percentage model is what they will accept, does it look like 20% is what they'll expect?
Yes, it does. I mean, whenever we interact with USDOE, they basically say the minimum amount is 20%. Okay. Don't expect anything less than 20%. And when I work with the Council of Chief State School Officers, they are all given the same message.
Okay.
Nicole.
Totally shifting gears. I'm not sure if you were in the room earlier when I shared that we had a pretty lengthy conversation at the Equity Committee about the current state of GED. We learned a lot about how the standards and the tests and the entire experience is going to change in 2014. There's currently a group doing a big sort of research project on it. It seemed pretty clear that there were some significant things that we could be doing at the Department of Education that would either really set us up for great success in utilizing this as a new tool for our out-of-school youth. And it seemed really unclear that anyone was working on it, and there seemed to be some very clear policy implications. I'm just curious, you may not know the answer today, but it seems like a very time-sensitive issue. Interestingly enough, it seems like very few people in Oregon are even aware that this important change is coming. So I'm just curious about your perspective on that.
So just to be specific, you're talking very specifically about the GED?
The test is
Right.
changing and all of those specifics, but there's major policy implications for who delivers it, who supports it. We don't necessarily have a coordinated system right now. As the test gets harder, it seems more important to have a coordinated. There just seem like a lot of serious things that we should be talking about, and I haven't heard anyone talk about it, but maybe it's all happening and you're just keeping a good secret.
No, I don't, I really don't think so. It's probably very timely and something that we need to get involved in. I will tell you that our focus is, at the department, is very much on, has been very much on, doesn't have to be, right? Has been very much on graduation and diplomas as compared to GED.
I understand that, but we included GED as part of our 40-40-20,
Right.
and almost 40% of our kids are just not in high school right now. So I think our concern is, we're not getting those kids back to school right now, so what's the plan?
Right. I see Gerald, because
Gerald,
a lot of community college.
I just would respond to GED. The GED tends to reside at the community colleges for the most part. And yes, we are understaffed and unfunded to do that. I think we are really working hard to get the word out in the change that the student that takes the test, that has 2 or 3 of the tests taken, needs to complete that before they change. And it isn't so much that they want to get it in while it's easier, as they just don't want to lose the work that they've already done. So we are doing a significant amount of publicity around that. But I do agree that there's lots more that we need to do, and I'd love to be able to bring our folks in and do a bigger, broader presentation about our GED services, if time allows.
I think we should invite the folks who presented today to present to the larger group, and maybe invite some shared information from you all, because I think community colleges do play an important role, and there are many other partners, but the challenge is that none of those partners are connected. And
I agree, and so I'd love to be part of that conversation. I was there this morning.
Yeah, it was very interesting.
Just a couple of comments to Rob. On those grants that you give out, be sure to have a baseline to see whether or not what the results are after you do that. And just a comment on those 109 laws that you're dealing with. I think your dad would say you're still going to have to score a touchdown. So keep your eye on the ball, right? I also like to comment on what Mark just said too. This editorial that the Oregonian had, and I get asked this question all the time: cutting classes, Oregon style, along with Oregon sports, one of the nation's shortest school years. Portland and other districts doubly cheat students by skipping on time. We're at the bottom 10 on whatever this scoring is, and we're the shortest school year. So I know that brings up a can of worms, but Bobby, is that our privy to talk about that in here, or we just hide underneath the desk, so to speak?
We're about $3 billion short of QEM.
What's QUM?
QEM, the quality education model, which what it would take to educate our students at 90%, 80% of our students. Is it 80 or 90? I'm sorry, I should know that. 90% of our students meeting benchmarks, about $3 billion short. That's research based.
All I know is being Bob 10 is not my. We probably need to 4:30 here. We don't need to discuss that right now, but I guess.
I'm noting it. I think there's some policy issues related to that could be worth discussing. So let me just
outside
write it
this room,
down.
they're asking a question. Although I get asked that all the time.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments for Rob? Nicole?
One more comment. I was going to make it earlier. It's really exciting to see all the initiatives come out, and I think there is general excitement, and I think folks are really noticing the changes in the air at the Department of Education. The continuous feedback I get is that communities are not hearing about jobs, and they're not hearing about the initiatives. And I continually get the feedback that people are not following the Department of Education website daily to learn about opportunities. Shocking, I know. I just think that there's so many good things happening. If we could find a different way to tell people, and while it's great to have good communication with the district, it's also great to have good communications with nonprofits and parent groups, because exciting things are happening and we should celebrate them and allow all the people we want to help and partner with us know about it.
Thank you. I know that we cannot communicate enough, and we need to broaden our efforts on that. We'll keep on working at that. We did a very interesting report here last month to the state board about one of our goals has been to have the demographics of the employees of the department mirror those of the state. And we've been working at that fairly diligently. And our hiring practices for about the last 18 months has matched the demographics of the state. It's not enough, because you don't close that gap or meet that goal unless you had 100% turnover and you hired at that rate. And so we need to find a way to continue to narrow that. But I am pleased at least with that effort. And I do think that effort begins to broaden our ability to communicate to the broader community in a way that's really important. So those two things are tied together. But certainly I know that we need to continue to work on communication. Right?
Okay, thank you, Rob. So now we're going to turn to the training on travel reimbursement. Sandy.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and board members. I'm Sandy Braden. I'm the office manager at the Oregon Education Investment Board. And I've been asked today to talk about travel reimbursements that as board members are entitled to claim should you so have some. The first one, I've broken it up into a couple of categories because it changes whether there's overnight travel or non-overnight travel involved. For non-overnight travel, you're entitled to certain meal per diems, and it's based upon when you start your day. Generally, the workday is considered starting at 8 o'clock in the morning and going until 5 p.m. So if you start your travel, non-overnight again, say at 6 o'clock in the morning, you would be entitled to an allowance for breakfast. If you return to either your place of business or home, wherever you departed from, 2 hours after your end of your work schedule, which would be about 7 p.m., you'd be entitled to a percentage for dinner. That's how it's kind of figured out. Generally, there is no allowance for lunch. Now, as with in all policies, there are some exceptions to these rules, and if there's a particular question you have, you might ask me, and I can find you the answer if I don't know it offhand. I'm not going to go into that because the exceptions are pretty strict about what is considered an exception. The meal per diem is also based upon the destination in which you're visiting. So the Portland per diem rate is different than what it would be, say, in Medford, perhaps. So it depends on where your destination is. This is also something that we look at the federal government as to what the per diem rates are, and it's on the website under the GSA website. While you're on business, you're entitled also to mileage reimbursement. That starts from wherever you originate your travel, from whether it's your home or your office, to your destination round trip. Depending on I think most of you use your own vehicle. We have the forms that you filled out. We ask that you fill them out once every fiscal year, basically that sets out which type of travel you're doing. If you are using your personal vehicle and there's a motor pool card available, but you choose to use your personal vehicle, sometimes you may be paid less. That generally is not a situation that you would run into. However, I have been told that you, because you're a board member, that you would be entitled to reserve a motor pool car if there's one in your area and if there's one available. Parking is also reimbursed with a receipt. Overnight travel. If you are on overnight travel status, then you do get lodging, and it's also a per diem based upon where your destination is. The room charges are, the per diem taxes are extra, so it's based just strictly on the room charges. Also, as a board member, you do need to get the state government rate to be reimbursed. If there's a problem with where you're going and the location, availability of different motel or hotels, wherever you're staying, rates, there is what we call a justification that it requires advance notification and authorization to go over the per diem amount. Meals are calculated differently on overnight travel. It also is structured upon when you leave and when you return to your home or work destination. There's a sliding scale upon that. There's 4 different breakouts for that. So it's one of those, if it comes up, then we can talk about it. It's generally not the normal that it does. There are a couple that do have overnight travel, and so that is a little bit different. The mileage is the same whether it's non-overnight or overnight travel, and also so is parking. All the rules, if you ever do want to learn more about them, are under the Oregon Accounting Manual, and it kind of spells out what you're.
I got a copy right here.
The things that you do need to fill out are the authorization to use private vehicle, and like I mentioned, if you fill that out once every fiscal year, I keep that on file, and I just turn it in because I do have to have that with it. The other thing that you'll need to fill out is what we call the TEDS form. It's the travel expense detail sheet. On this sheet, it's really important to put the time that you leave your destination, or, you leave home to go to your destination, and vice versa when you return, especially if it's overnight, or especially if you're requesting meals. If you're just requesting reimbursement for mileage, you don't need to fill in the times. But that's how they calculate as to whether or not you're entitled to the per diem for the meals, and the amounts is by the arrival, the departure and the arrival time. Then most importantly, you need to sign it and either submit that to Seth. I know he receives a lot of them and give them to me, or you can give them to me directly. However, that chain has been established just fine. And then if you have any special situations that you're not sure about, please let me know, and I'll find out the answer if I don't know it, and let me know what it is.
Sandy, thank you. Nancy?
I just want to let people know, if this is the first time you've met Sandy, that she is just phenomenal. And every office needs someone who really understands these rules so that we make sure we abide by them and do what's right. And I really appreciate your leadership. You're a great contributor to the team.
Thank you.
So if there are any general questions for Sandy, you could share those if you've got a particular question.
I just
or
like to
no
encourage
question.
everybody to use their vehicle.
As much as possible. All right, thank you very much, Sandy. So our last item, and we're right back on time. Sandy, thanks for doing that. 4:30, public comment. And there is none, except an individual, Lisa Lyon, originally signed up but had to leave. She did leave some documents that Seth is giving out about decoding dyslexia. So we'll leave those for you to read. Is there anything else for the good of the order?
I just wanted to mention one thing, and that is a book that we will hear from a speaker at OSBA. So those of you who will be going, I know the superintendent group is reading the book, How Children Succeed. If you haven't heard about it, we keep hearing with the early learning work, and today we heard it about dropout and specifically the gang prevention work about the ACEs. And I know I've had different articles sent to me and so on, but I think the way the book treats not only that, but some of those things that we all think about and talk about in terms of the affective domain of what impacts our students. We talk about it in our race work, in our poverty work, and all of that. I just feel really informed now that I'm reading that book about what the current research is saying about all of those things. And if you haven't yet tried out Audible books, it's great if you drive a lot. You can get through those books and really learn a lot while you're driving. But anyway, I just thought that since the superintendent group is reading it, the school board members will probably be reading it. I know ours is using it as a book study. And many of the research, it's pretty dense. There's a lot of research in it, but it's summarized in those categories. And I just think it's a piece that would be a way of all of us staying knowledgeable about those topics. So just offer up as a suggestion. Yeah, I actually have it right here. It's called How Children Succeed, and it's by Paul
Paul Tough, yeah.
Thank you, Yvonne.
Sure.
There being no other business, this meeting is adjourned.